I hereby call to order the Roseville City Council meeting for Monday, April 22nd, 2024. Mr. City Manager, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Strawn.
Here.
Councilmember Etton.
Here.
Councilmember Shorter.
Here.
Councilmember Groff.
Here.
Mayor Rowe.
Here. And with us at the dais, by way of introductions, we've got our City Attorney, Rachel Tierney, who's on my right at the end, and City Manager Pat Trudgeon is on my left at the other end. We have a number of other staff and guests who will be participating in the meeting, and we'll make introductions as those folks come forward for their portions of the meeting. I would note for people from the public, there is meeting information on the table in the back of the chambers underneath the clock. Extra copies of the agenda if you want to look at that, and then there's a full set of meeting materials in the big binder right next to that that's available for reference as people need it. Would remind folks, if you've got a cell phone, to silence it or otherwise assure that it doesn't disrupt the meeting this evening. And with that, we'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next, our agenda is approval of tonight's agenda, and as always, we'll start with Mr. Trudgeon. Are there any changes from a staff perspective this evening?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, as I mentioned in an earlier email, we are requesting that item 7A, which is a request for an abatement for 3119 Mildred Drive, be removed from consideration tonight. We have been in contact with the property owner and want to work through with him to resolve the code issues. We will bring this back if that is unsuccessful at a future meeting, but there's no need to take action tonight.
All right, thank you, Mr. Trudgeon. And I'll check with the council. Are there any changes that council members would like to make to the agenda this evening, or items to remove from the consent for separate consideration?
No.
Does not appear to be the case. And we'll do a quick check with members of the public. Also, we have a section of our agenda called the consent agenda, which is at the end, starting at the bottom of the first page and carrying over, I believe, onto the second. No, all at the bottom of the first page. It is about 6 items that we usually take up as a single motion with limited opportunity for input and discussion, and it's usually fairly administrative items that don't have hopefully a lot of controversy associated with them. But that being said, if there is anybody here this evening who wishes to speak to one of those items or ask a question related to one of those items, we would, as a courtesy, move it earlier in the meeting for you if that is the case. Is there anyone here this evening for an item in section 10 of tonight's agenda? It does not appear to be the case. Then we have our agenda with the one change to remove item 7A from the agenda altogether. Is there a motion to approve that agenda?
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Schroeder, seconded by Councilmember Groff. And any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. We have our agenda for tonight. Next is our first opportunity for public comment during our meeting this evening. We'll have a number of opportunities as agenda items come forward, but we do start each meeting with an opportunity for general public comment on items that are not on tonight's agenda, but either may be related to city business or of interest to people in the community. We would just ask in that case that if you're here to speak under general comment as well as any comment, you follow the City Council rules for public speaking, which is a 3-minute time limit per speaker. We do ask that you state your name and either your address or your street, at least for the record, at the beginning of your comments. Direct comments and questions to the City Council. And if there are questions that need to be followed up on, we can certainly follow up after the comments are concluded. So with that, we'll open it up for general public comment this evening. And I should have mentioned that when you want to speak, you have a seat at one of the chairs at the table, and the microphone will pick you up. So feel free to come on up and introduce yourself.
Hello, council members and staff. My name is Lindsay Stauner. I'm with the St. Paul Farmers Market, and we are located at 295th Street East, St. Paul, Minnesota. I am here to share with you that we will be starting our seasonal market here in Roseville in 2 weeks. Our opening day is on May 7th, and we're really excited to be back again this year. You each have a handout in front of you here, just kind of giving some information about the market, and I'll leave a stack of them as also with our full schedule that you can keep at City Hall in case any community members have any questions or comments about the market. We have about 40 vendors signed up this year with a collection of local food. And we're just really excited. We'll have some community booths as well, including the Master Gardeners. So our kickoff day is May 7th, and we'll be here all the way through the end of October. The market is open from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m.
And where is the market located?
Yeah, it's at Corpus Christi Catholic Church, and that's at 2131 Fairview Ave.
All right. Thank you for being here this evening and letting everybody know. And I know there's a number of people who perked up when they heard about that. So, and I see a thumbs up there. So we look forward to it.
Yeah, Roseville Market has been one of our best markets. I think last year we had about an average of 1,300 visitors per week. So that was really great. So we're excited to be back again for another season.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public here for general public comment this evening? All right. With that, then we'll proceed to the rest of our agenda. And thank you again. Next on our agenda, we've got recognitions and donations. And this evening we have a number of proclamations. So hopefully the mayor won't get hoarse reading them all, but we'll give it a try here.
We believe in you.
And with that, the very first proclamation this evening is related to Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month in Roseville. And the proclamation reads as follows. Whereas the city of Roseville is committed to recognizing and honoring the contributions of all members of our community, and whereas in 1992, Congress passed Public Law 102-450, which annually designated May as Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and whereas the month of May was selected to commemorate the immigration of Japanese citizens to the United States on May 7th of 1843, and to mark the anniversary of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad on May 10th, 1869, with the majority of the workers being Chinese immigrants who were often mistreated. And whereas Japanese American troops fought for freedom from tyranny abroad in World War II, while their families here at home were interned simply on the basis of their ethnic origin, and whereas in 1965, the Immigration and Nationality Act opened new doors of opportunity for more Asian and Pacific Islander immigrants to the United States, and whereas the end of the Vietnam War brought new Vietnamese, Cambodian, Hmong, and and Laotian communities to the United States and to Minnesota, and whereas there are over 20 million Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the United States, with over 260,000 calling Minnesota home, and nearly 3,500 in Roseville based on the 2020 census. And whereas many Roseville residents identify as Asian American or Pacific Islander, particularly Hmong and Karen community members, they contribute to the vibrant community of Roseville through their rich cultures and also as business owners, educators, scientists, artists, and in many other ways. And whereas the Hmong people began arriving in Minnesota in 1975 as refugees from the destructive wars in their homeland, in which the Twin Cities metro region has the largest concentration of Hmong people in the United States, and whereas the Karen people have been oppressed in their homeland for decades and sought refuge in other places, with St. Paul currently supporting one of the largest Karen communities in the United States. And whereas despite all the progress, many Asian American and Pacific Islanders continue to face persistent inequality, discrimination, including barriers to equal access to education, employment, and healthcare, Asian Americans, especially those who are Muslim, Hindu, or Sikh, too often face senseless violence and harassment due to the color of their skin, the tenets of their faith, or merely by being Asian. And whereas the 2024 Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month honors the theme of advancing leaders through innovation, and whereas the City of Roseville invites all members of the community to renew their commitment to ensuring cultural humility, racial equality, and justice by participating in activities designed to advance the cause of freedom and equality for all. Now, therefore, be resolved that the City of Roseville hereby declares the month of May 2024 to be Asian American and Pacific Island Heritage Month.
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's moved by Councilmember Strawn, seconded by Councilmember Etten to approve that proclamation. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion passes unanimously. That proclamation is approved. The next proclamation deals with Mental Health Awareness Month in Roseville, and it reads as follows. Whereas mental health is part of overall health and helps to sustain an individual's thought processes, relationships, productivity, and ability to adapt to change or face adversity. Mental illness adversely affects those abilities and often is life-threatening in nature. According to the Mental Health Alliance, 1 in 5 adults and children will experience a mental health condition in their lifetime. And whereas it is important for all to maintain mental health and learn the symptoms of mental illness, long delays, sometimes decades, occur between the time symptoms first appear and when individuals get help. Early identification and treatment can make a difference in successful management of mental illness and in recovery. And whereas we recognize numerous residents of the city of Roseville are impacted in various ways by mental illness, and whereas every citizen and community can make a difference in helping end the silence and stigma that for too long has surrounded mental illness and discouraged people from getting help. And whereas public education and civic activities can encourage mental health and help improve the lives of individuals and families affected by mental illness, now therefore be it resolved, the city of Roseville hereby declares May 2024 to be Mental Health Awareness Month in the city of Roseville.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Groff, seconded by Councilmember Etten. Discussion on that motion?
No.
Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. That proclamation is approved. Next, we have a proclamation related to Older Adults Month in Roseville, and that reads as follows. Whereas Roseville is home to many residents aged 60 years and older, and whereas older adults in Roseville are the roots from which our community has grown, who bestow gifts of wisdom and insight upon younger generations and strengthen the bonds between neighbors to create a better place to live. And whereas the city of Roseville recognizes and focuses on older adults taking charge of their health, getting engaged in their communities, and making positive impacts in the lives of others. And whereas older adults are productive, active, and influential members of society, sharing essential talents, wisdom, and life experiences with families, friends, and neighbors. And whereas our community can provide that recognition and respect by enriching the quality of life for older adults by increasing opportunities to remain in their community as active and engaged citizens, providing services, technologies, and support systems that allow older adults to foster and maintain connections within their community, and emphasizing the value of older adults by publicly recognizing their contributions to the diversity, strength, and unity of our community. Now, therefore, be resolved, the City of Roseville hereby declare May 2024 to be Older Adults Month in the City of Roseville, and be it further resolved that we urge every citizen to honor our older adults and the professionals, family members, and volunteers who often care for them. Our recognition of older adults and their involvement in our lives can help us achieve stronger and more meaningful connections with each other and enrich our community's quality of life.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Shorter, seconded by Councilmember Groff. Any discussion on that motion? If not, all those in favor of the proclamation for Older Adults Month signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. That proclamation is approved. Next, we have a proclamation regarding Days of Remembrance in Roseville, and it's especially timely, I would say, at this time. The proclamation reads as follows. Whereas the Holocaust was the state-sponsored systematic persecution and annihilation of European Jewry by Nazi Germany and its collaborators between 1933 and 1945, and whereas an estimated 6 million Jews, along with millions of Romani, disabled, LGBTQ+, and political dissidents, among other marginalized groups, suffered grievously and were murdered under Nazi tyranny. And whereas the history of the Holocaust offers an opportunity to reflect on the moral responsibilities of individuals, societies, and governments. And whereas the Days of Remembrance have been set aside as a time for all to remember the victims of the Holocaust, as well as to reflect on the need for respect of all people to strive to overcome intolerance and indifference through learning and remembrance. And whereas the people of the city of Roseville remember the terrible events of the Holocaust, and especially the deaths of more than 1 million children who were the victims, and remain vigilant against hatred, persecution, and tyranny. And whereas the people of Roseville are dedicated to the principles of individual freedom in a just society. And whereas the Roseville community honors the memory of the victims, survivors, rescuers, and liberators of the Holocaust. Now, therefore, be it resolved, the city of Roseville hereby proclaims the week of May 5th to May 12th, 2024 as the Days of Remembrance in Roseville.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Strawn, seconded by Councilmember Shorter. Any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and that proclamation is approved. And finally, a proclamation regarding Poppy Days in the city of Roseville, which reads as follows. Whereas after the First World War, inspired by the opening lines of John McCrae's wartime poem In Flanders Fields, and championed by international humanitarian workers Moyna Michael of the United States and Madame Guerin of France, the poppy was adopted in many countries to commemorate the sacrifices of those who had been killed in war. And whereas the United States Veterans of Foreign Wars in 1922 officially designated the poppy as a symbol of remembrance and conducted their first Poppy Day drive that year, and in 1924 the VFW registered the Buddy Poppy as its official commemorative poppy. And whereas VFW Buddy Poppies are assembled by disabled and needy veterans, and the proceeds of the use of Buddy Poppies as a fundraising campaign are used exclusively for the benefit of disabled and needy veterans and the widows and orphans of deceased veterans. And whereas the basic purpose of the annual distribution of Buddy Poppies by the Veterans of Foreign Wars is eloquently reflected in the desire to honor the dead by helping the living. And whereas each year the members of the Roseville Anderson Nelson VFW Post 7555 distribute poppies at local sites the weekend before Memorial Day to raise awareness about the service of veterans and the importance of Memorial Day. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the City of Roseville hereby declares May 24th, 25th, and 26th of this year to be Poppy Days in Roseville for the distribution of these symbols of appreciation for the sacrifices of our honored dead, and further urges citizens of this community to recognize the merits of this cause by contributing generously to its support through donations for Buddy Poppies on those days. And be it further resolved that the city urges all patriotic citizens to wear a Buddy Poppy as mute evidence of our gratitude to the men and women of this country who have risked their lives in defense of the freedoms which we continue to enjoy as Americans.
So moved.
Second.
All right, moved by Councilmember Etten, seconded by Councilmember Schroeder. Any discussion on that motion?
No, thank you.
All right, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion passes unanimously, and that proclamation is approved as well. That then concludes that portion of our agenda related to proclamations. There's a lot to be remembering at this time and thoughtful about. We appreciate that effort by folks to bring these proclamations forward to the community. That brings us to our business items then. Our first business item this evening is an update on the Highway 36 transportation study, which has been ongoing in our community and neighboring communities for some months now. And with us this evening, we have our city engineer and assistant public works director, Jen Lowry, to introduce our guest for this presentation. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. We had David Alvine come a couple months ago and give an update on the first phase of this multimodal study. We're nearing the end of the second phase, correct?
That's right.
And so I'll just hand it over to him and stay up here if it's appropriate for discussion.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Welcome.
Mayor, council members, and staff. I'm David Alvine. I'm a transportation planner with MnDOT in our Metro District. And Jennifer must be having fun on the study because it's actually a year since I've been here, not just a few
Really?
months. Yes.
Wow.
So
It just seems like yesterday.
time flies when you're having fun. Deeply grateful for her participation on our project management team. We've been meeting monthly, and when I was last here, we were talking about what are the needs of the study. I'm going to take just a few minutes and summarize some of the safety information and such that we've been looking at, working with in our public engagement to come up with alternatives. And that's my main mission here this evening, is to share those alternatives with you, show the ones that we'd like to carry forward, but also the ones that we would like to eliminate. That's a big part of what we do in the planning study process, is to get rid of the stuff that there isn't support for. So we'll get to that shortly. I always like to start with this graphic because it tells what we do in corridor study planning. We help people move along our highway, and we help people get across it and get over it in this case. This is our study area. To remind you, we are about 8 miles from the 35W interchange proceeding eastward to just a little bit east of English Street, where the purple line was to cross. That alignment is being changed, but it's that Gervais Street area where the eastern end of the study area is. And you're seeing here our Highway 36 main line in orange, and then the purple areas are the crossing components that are such an integral and important part of this study. We're in 3 cities, Roseville, Little Canada, and Maplewood. And we also have Metro Transit participating, Met Council participating, and of course the county. We're just about at the end of our evaluation phase. We have some refined alternatives to share with you. Be taking your input tonight, incorporating it into our study report, and then we'll begin what we call the project development plan, which will be understanding what projects come next, who can lead them, what additional information do we need to start advancing solutions. This is just a summary again of what a study, this is called a planning and environmental linkages study. So it's intended to help support those future planning processes, especially if they involve environmental documentation. We don't expect there would be a lot of need for that, but it's possible with some of the solutions that we would need to do an environmental assessment. And so we've begun doing some of that pre-work, which involves, as I said, getting rid of the alternatives that don't meet the needs of this study. So we don't get into detailed design. We don't come up with one preferred alternative. You're going to see 3 different alternatives tonight. Another reason we're doing this is because of money. In yellow, you'll see here highlighted the bridge projects that we need to do within the next 10 years. In about 10 years, that bridge at Fairview and Cleveland is going to need to be replaced, as well as the bridge at Snelling. Altogether, that's getting close to 75, maybe $100 million, depending. It's good that we're taking the time now to understand the needs so that those future projects don't leave anything out, don't leave any people out. This is kind of the heart of the study area. Just to be reoriented here, we're looking toward the east, and you'll see that Cleveland interchange, and then the Fairview interchange in the distance, and then Snelling a little further on. So just a little bit of orientation. Our traffic numbers are pretty high for a 4-lane facility. We have about 6% of trucks as well, which is also relatively high compared to our metro average. We also have our Easy Pass planning process that has designated this part of Highway 36 as a Tier 2. And that's a big part of what's driving this study, is to understand, is an Easy Pass facility, which would go from probably Highway 61 to the intersection with 35W. Is that still the right solution? We looked at it a number of years ago, and we need to understand if it still makes sense given the changes that have happened post-COVID with travel demand and with the build out of our other Easy Pass lanes, which you see in purple here. This statistic gets to the heart of people going over our highway. We actually have more than twice as many people going over Highway 36 in this study area than moving along it. And the majority of those are going by car, but a lot are going by foot and by bike. I should say also, we're not totally certain about those foot and bike numbers. Planning for people walking and biking is still a relatively new task for us at MnDOT. And so we have new data sources of data, new ways of estimating, but planning for cars has been something we've done for decades. And we're trying to do a better job now of planning for everybody. The safety summary, I think we looked at this last time I was here, but we have in red, the dark red are those areas that are above a critical crash rate. It's not quite average, it's hard to say what the average crash rate is, but it's exceeding what we would expect and what we would want to see. And so here you're seeing at that Snelling Avenue interchange, we have a problem. We also have, I can use the mousey mouse. Here at Lexington, we have a light crash problem. And then down at County Road B, we have some safety issues going on. And also here at the Hamlin on and off ramps at Commerce Street, we have some safety crashes exceeding our expected rates. Those were on the ramps and at the intersections. These are along the main lines and also on the ramps. And we can see here at Hamlin, we're having issues on the Commerce Street side again. At Lexington, problems on the ramps there. On the main line near Dale is where we have our main concerns. And then to a lesser degree out on the east end of the study area. And I put this in partly because you can see we don't have any bike or pedestrian crossing of our probably most heavily traveled and in demand crossing of Highway 36. This is the Snelling Avenue Bridge, and this is the transit station over at Roseville. Ironically, here's my office, and so I can look out and see a non-compliant highway structure. And this is kind of ground zero for our thinking about improving things for all travelers. We've been doing a lot of engagement since we last visited. More than 5,000 written comments were submitted, and we had a poor intern who read many of them and coded them. And what you see here is the result of that coding that allowed us to get the type of comment here in the left-hand column, and then across the top, the location, if we were able to determine it, where those comments were being generated from. And what you're seeing here is pedestrian comments are clustering near Fairview and Snelling and Hamlin. Similarly, the bike comments in that same area. We also have off at the far end where we couldn't necessarily put a geographic location to it. Those issues, the pedestrian, the bike. We also have a significant number of driving comments, again, clustering in that same area. So it's this area near Rosedale, Hamlin, west of Lexington is where we're seeing a lot of the issues. And so through that engagement process and through our analysis of the safety information and our forecasts, our traffic forecasts, both for people in vehicles and people walking and biking, we determined what we call the primary needs, the reason we're doing this study. And it's to improve conditions for people walking and biking, improve those conditions for people, the safety conditions for people in cars, and improve mobility for people riding in vehicles. So the alternatives. We developed two types of alternatives. One is what we call a preliminary, a higher level that looks at the main line, basically the cross-section configuration. Are we going to add a lane throughout the entire length? Are we going to drop a lane? Are we going to convert a lane to managed lane? So a big range of big picture approaches, and then treatments of those crossings. Would we want to improve those crossings to be consistent with what local plans call for, both the city plan and the county plan? Or are there opportunities to exceed what's already called for in plans and improve the conditions even further? So you see in the left-hand column here, 6 alternatives, what we call preliminary alternatives, that we developed to a degree that we were able to understand if they met those 3 primary needs. And so the first line is the no build. That's just required. So we have a baseline understanding to compare for what if we left everything the way it is? Would these alternatives be better? The first alternative is to add easy pass lanes, 1 in each direction, and make sure that shoulder BRT facility is there. Right now, Metro Transit buses can ride during congestion. They can ride in the shoulder. There's some inconsistencies in that right now. So we would want to make sure that that shoulder BRT capacity is there. But if it's an express, those buses can also get into the Easy Pass lane. And we actually are carrying a lot more people, not a lot more, but we're carrying more people in an Easy Pass lane in buses these days in some corridors in the metro. So the Easy Pass lane is not just for people who can afford to pay the fare during rush hour. It's for people riding in buses. And it's also for everybody, virtually 93% of the time. So an Easy Pass lane can function as a general purpose lane. We also looked at alternative 2, Easy Pass lanes without those shoulders for buses, an effort to conserve pavement, try and reduce a little bit of that permeable surface. That's not consistent with Metro Transit's plan to run highway BRT in this corridor. That's a pretty important need for people's mobility. It's not just the mobility of people in cars, but the ability of people to travel by bus along this corridor. And so that was determined we would not carry it forward. The third alternative is what we call auxiliary lanes. So extensions of the ramp, so you have additional space to merge or decelerate. And that would be paired again with the highway BRT on the shoulder. And that was determined it would meet the needs. We also looked at Easy Pass lanes only between 35W and 35E. The idea would be to limit the amount of new construction we needed to do. But we found that it didn't fully address our traffic forecast showed it would not fully address the congestion that is beginning to occur to the east of 35E. So that was not carried forward. Adding a general purpose lane also was not carried forward to some degree because of what I was saying earlier about an Easy Pass lane functioning as a general purpose lane 93% of the time. We also have general policies for the region that say when it's a choice between adding a managed lane or adding an Easy Pass lane, you should choose the Easy Pass lane. That's our general regional Met Council policy. And so given that, we also did the traffic forecast calculations as well. And the general purpose lanes, really the difference between Easy Pass lane is marginal for vehicles. So that is not carried forward. And then we looked at adding just one Easy Pass lane. You're probably familiar with how it works out on 394 on the west side. And that works because the morning and afternoon split between peak demand in one direction is such that it's worthwhile. In this case, you need to be at least at 70-30, so your difference between your morning and afternoon peak. We're only at 60-40 in this corridor. And so given the extra hassle of the maintaining those things, sending somebody out to move the gates every day, and the additional work that's needed, plus the savings in terms of pavement reduction was pretty marginal. And so that one was eliminated. And so what you see is we have 3 alternatives still standing. We took that alternative 1, which is add Easy Pass with highway BRT, and we have the 1A option and the 1C option. And that hinges on a lot of the public feedback that we received about the ramps at Hamlin. And you'll recall we had a little discussion about that when I was last here. And we heard pretty clearly businesses in that area and just our general public outreach was split pretty much 50-50 on whether or not those ramps to and from Hamlin Avenue should stay or go. And so we responded to that by creating a refined version of the original option 1 that would keep the ramps at Hamlin open. And then our third option is to add the auxiliary lanes. That unfortunately would require closing the ramps at Hamlin because we need to address that safety problem with the merges. And so I can show a little bit, some graphics here that may help our discussion and your feedback on it. This is our main line existing conditions, and you'll see the purple. So this is 35W. The purple outside lines here are the existing auxiliary lanes, and we have some crash locations showing on red dots there. And then down at the bottom, you see what what we call the cross section looks like. And so there are the two main lines going through with the auxiliary on the outside. Here's what that alternative 1A would look like. This is adding the managed lanes. So those are shown in orange all the way from Highway 61 through to 35W. There would also be auxiliary lanes in this congested area around Roseville. And so you see down here, I think, yeah, I've got a bigger picture here to show you. I think you have a packet in front of you now. I think I've finally caught up to the packet. I didn't give you all those preliminary slides in there. Apologies for not referencing that earlier. And so the cross section here, this is just east of Snelling Ave, is on the inside you see the managed lane with shoulder, the two through lanes, and the auxiliary lane on both sides. And what you're seeing is not the same type of interchange that's out there today, which is a cloverleaf, which is the traditional forward cloverleaf. Those kind of sweeping ramps promote speed, and speed is why we have a lot of our safety problems in this area. The design you're seeing here at the upper left is what's called a folded diamond. And it is counterintuitive to me because it looks a bit like a folded loop. But I'm told by traffic engineers that the diamond part of it comes from the fact that it has right angle intersections with the main line. And so even though those loops are folded there, because they have this 90-degree angle at Snelling, that's why we call it a folded diamond. And it's similar to what is in existence at Fairview already. The other feature of Alternative 1A is a new connection of Commerce Street behind Target underneath Snelling to connect up with the frontage road over at the southwest quadrant of this interchange. And we've gotten a lot of positive feedback on that connection. This would allow a person to get off at Fairview and pick up that frontage road and access the area behind Target. The other feature here that's really interesting is a bus-only turn into the existing transit station at Rosedale. So instead of having to go up to County B2 and loop around, add several minutes, a bus-only left turn in and out of the mall there could really speed up travel time for A-Line, for one, and help with our congestion problem up at County B2. So I think those are the key features of this Alternative 1A. And I'll just pause there. I've been talking a lot, and I want to be mindful of our time. Is there anything that's jumping out at you from this alternative that you think works or meets those needs? I guess the question we've been asking people, do you think these alternatives meet those needs of walkability, bikeability, safety, and mobility?
Great. Thoughts, feedback? Councilmember Strawn?
Yes, thank you. First of all, Gervais, Is that really how you say it? I've called it Jarvis my whole life.
Jar-
I think it's Jarvis.
It's Jarvis and local.
Local
but it-
vernacular.
The
Is,
French connection.
Thank you
is
very
Gervais.
much.
thank you. I've just called it Jarvis as long as I can
Jarvis.
remember, and I was like, wait. Huh? I note on page 31 of your presentation it says local business comments, RAS comments, MnDOT maintenance comments. Those weren't included, and I don't know if you have, or is that part of the as part of that matrix of all comments, but it didn't. And then you said that community input kind of made it 50-50 on how things were between 1A and 1C. I don't know if you can speak to what some of the comments were from the high school, or how that would impact things.
I certainly can. And I did not include them in written form here, but I did want to address them. You asked me when I was last here to please go out and talk to some of those folks. And we did have good conversations with them. Some of them were somewhat candid. So I want to be careful how I characterize what people said. I could start with Wellington Development, the company that is redeveloping the old Department of Ed site. And they are still looking for a tenant. And they need to maintain all access options. They were very supportive of the Commerce Street connection underneath 51. They thought Commerce Street itself could be a little wider and help promote whatever kind of development they bring back there. On the issue of the Hamlin ramps, they were quite clear that they need to be kept because a future tenant would see that as a benefit. We spoke to Target, which is target number 1, and I learned it's the 4th busiest Target in the country,
Look at that.
which was really remarkable.
Bunker.
That was quite an eye-opening visit. Very similar comments. The Commerce Street connection would be a boon to them. They would enjoy that very much because it gives their delivery people direct access to the loading dock in back. We followed up, actually. They had some concerns about the elevation. Jennifer was super helpful in providing information about utilities that are under there. And we determined that it could work. The option to have a connection there could work with their existing geometry for their loading dock. So that was a relief. They too, very interested in keeping that access open at Hamlin, keeping those ramps at Hamlin open. That's a big part of why we came up with the additional option. We talked to Dr. Wilson, the principal at the school, and some of her staff about the school's needs. And they again are concerned about keeping access at Hamlin open. I think the statistic was 27% or so of students at the school are of choice, and so are coming from more distant locations, either being driven by parents or by themselves. And that is an important access point that helps maintain vehicle flow. I have yet to follow up on my invitation to go out and actually see how afternoon dismissal goes, but Dr. Wilson assured me it's a little crazy, and it would help me understand better why they are interested in keeping all the access they can. On the other side, though, they are interested in more opportunities for people walking. And so closing those ramps at Hamlin actually allows us to have not grade separated, but physically separated bike lanes and pedestrian walkways from the road. Whereas if we keep the ramps there, the intersection needs to be larger, and the dimensions for the intersection for having a barrier would not work, and so it would just have to be a painted barrier on the road. And so you wouldn't get quite the level of comfort and safety that you would expect with that. We also got comments from MnDOT maintenance that they do not like the Hamlin ramps. The signals don't work well all the time. There seems to be a problem there. They make more accidents. It's very difficult to plow. And the merge distances where people getting on and off create some safety problems for when they're out trying to do maintenance. So I think that's about the extent of comments. We were not able to speak directly with Rosedale about what they would feel. They did host us for a fabulous public open house in, I think it was the first weekend in March. But we have not been able to reach them yet. I'm not quite sure what their position on the Hamlin ramps would be, or the other facilities that are closer to them.
Just had a couple follow. I just think I know that this traffic study was conducted in 2022, but I'm sure if you're housed right close by, you've noticed that, especially Tuesday through Thursday of late, the traffic has really increased. Mondays and Fridays tend to be a little lighter, I think, with hybrid schedules continuing, but the amount of people who are back into an office per location seem to have increased greatly as someone who gets on 36 every day. I just wanted to comment about I think the commerce underneath Snelling is a great idea, but I do think it's really important to, you had a bike lane noted on that, but I want to make sure that if we consider a bike lane that it extends all the way from Hamlin to Fairview.
Oh, for sure.
Because neither side of that have even sidewalks. So along in front of the apartment buildings, from Snelling to Fairview, you're on your own. There's no bike lanes. There's no there's not even parking along the side. It's just two straight roads with no sidewalks. So I love the idea. And then the other piece would be it'd be really nice if a bike trail went to, at least on the Target side, there is sidewalk in there if they somehow connected up so that it got to that B intersection of B and Snelling, just because, on either side. And then I guess, we have had problems with carts before, so love to know what the solution would be if we're going to ask Target to put locks or something on the cart, because then if it's easier to get underneath the freeway, it could be a remote parking access. And then just lastly, I wanted to know how all of these things work together with issues we've been addressing with that D and Snelling intersection.
Yeah. Jennifer and I were talking about the Snelling and B. That project is a county project, I believe.
Well, it's a mixed bag. It's a study funded by the county, primarily led by the city. It is coordinated. Our short-term and long-term, or long-term concepts that we're talking about assume that this folded diamond would happen. So I don't know if you have any exhibit of Snelling itself for this.
I don't think I do.
But the fact that it would be two intersections with signalized traffic control, the kind of the cross sections considered for future rebuild of Snelling would provide for off-road, at least PED facilities. We have their paths. We haven't gotten in detail to provide access all the way of Snelling, and then it would also you would no longer have cars coming off of the freeway at speed approaching that intersection there. So they are coordinated. There's a lot of the same people on both.
Yeah. And I should have mentioned another reason for this 90-degree intersection is slower speeds. And our target speed for Snelling would be 45 miles an hour, which is about at least 5, maybe 10 below what's going on today. And so that would be more consistent with the kind of speed you'd want at County B and Snelling. So you'd have just a slower speed segment all the way from Harmar up to even after B2. So slowing things down is a key part of what this strategy with alternative A would be with this interchange type.
And this folded interchange is the only option moving forward for Snelling itself.
Yeah, we did have, you noticed option 1B was missing. That was eliminated because it used what we call a tight diamond, which is basically, it's the, I don't know if I don't have an image of it. Here it is, yes. I anticipated myself.
I'm impressed.
What you see with the tight diamond, and this is the reason we needed to eliminate it, is to make it work, you would have to eliminate the Hamlin ramps. And we heard very clearly we need an option, at least one, that retains those Hamlin ramps. And in order to make it possible for somebody to exit from 36 to 35W North, you would need what's called a collector distributor road, a CD road system, as it says on the graphic. And that, you might be familiar, there's some on 394 in the western part of the metro, there's some on 35E to the south. But it's kind of like you have a separate highway going alongside the main highway. And in order for somebody to make that move from 36 to 35E, they would have to get into the lane way back at Lexington. And so just from a common sense standpoint, it doesn't work so well. And you can see the cross section here, the profile, the amount of asphalt, additional asphalt that would be needed to make this option work just isn't consistent with our goal. I don't even know if we have enough right of way to fit all those lanes in. We want to minimize the amount of pavement that we're putting down because of stormwater and maintenance issues. So that's where 1B went.
Councilmember Adams.
Thank you for all of that. I think some of these thoughts that you have, I would agree with, and I think pertain to some of the other ones here. The questions about Roz are well taken. I'm wondering if you've had
Roseville High School.
Roseville High School. If you've had communication with the county just rebuilt Lexington and B2. Did they build that considering the possibility that Hamlin would shut down?
No.
Thinking about the peak times for the high school, what we're going to do is you're going to pile more traffic into that, especially people turning left and heading westbound on B2 to the high school. You're going to put a lot of extra strain in that situation. So I wonder about that coordination. So the first answer is no.
I don't know that we discussed that issue with the school directly. I know we did.
Well, the county.
The county's
county.
the county's on the PMT for the project management team. I don't think that when Lexington was redone, this conversation, considering Hamlin ramp closures, had even begun at all. So I'm guessing no.
Okay. All right. Was there any conversation with the two churches there at that intersection?
We did go,
Kings,
we
I
did
think
go
it
to
is.
King of Kings. That's
No, that's on Dale Street. There's Grace, and then there's an Episcopal church. I can't remember.
St. Christopher's.
Thank you.
I do remember we reached out to them, but we're not able to line something up.
Okay. All right. I would concur with Councilmember Strawn's comments about commerce, first of all, being a positive extension, but also thinking about that pedestrian access. That would be a tremendous boon for what we have as people crossing not at the intersection, just north of B, between B and 36. So I would hope that would provide a much safer connection for folks to important resources for people at Target and other, the library and things like that. So I really appreciate that. My other questions about these intersection additions on Snelling Avenue. When we think about some of the big changes that have happened in the North Metro, and I'm thinking about the intersection at Rice Street and 36, and about the intersection of Rice Street and 694. They were eliminating traffic signals, and this is adding 2 traffic signals. So I'm curious about that. The projections here, I don't know what they would be 2 years after it was built, but the projections in 2045 are for those to be rated as a C level. So I feel like we're building in a problem.
C is
When-
actually pretty good from a traffic engineering point of view.
Well, but it flows beautifully right now with nothing. So we're actually building in congestion, and quite opposite from these recent things that have been award winning. Hey, we took out this many intersections and whatever. So can you speak to the purposes and ways we might think about this as not building a bunch of congestion, but actually this is necessary, or roundabouts wouldn't work, or we couldn't put this all into one interchange like they did at Rice 36. Can you talk about that, please?
Yeah, you're very right about it will move slower. It'll move at level C. That is the intent, to improve the safety piece of it. The design of the interchange also provides connection for bikes and pedestrians to get over and across, which they don't have today. And so we need to somehow get those pedestrians across that traffic line. And so the introduction of those new 90-degree intersections creates a place where we can have crosswalks for people and bikes. And that's something we heard from Target, is that they want more ability for people, because they know people are crossing on the bridges and the same place just north of B over Snelling today with the carts.
Mm-hmm.
They're very concerned about that. So that's one of the other reasons, is to accommodate pedestrians and bikes where they don't have accommodation today.
Okay, but you could have pedestrians without intersections, right?
So crossing, I think, is
We wouldn't need to cross anything if there wasn't an intersection built there. You would
No,
just have a
crossing
pedestrian
Snelling.
thing.
crossing Snelling, I think, is the
They'll need to
There-
cross Snelling.
there aren't
but
as
they'll
many
also-
opportunities without these interchanges.
We'd also
Yeah.
have to cross on and off ramps.
unless
Yes, we're creating crossings for the on and off ramps, and but without those new additions, adding congestion makes my head explode. So without those new intersections, the pathways would just go straight through. We wouldn't have to worry about. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe because of the loops that are there right now, it's critical. But we've talked about how can we just carry people over. It's a critical thing. I think as an expansion for Roseville, for people getting to work and to the facilities. But I guess it's the congestion piece that blows up my brain.
Yes.
Well, and I think some of that comes to signal timing and those types of coordination to make things still flow well,
Yeah.
or well enough.
We've done preliminary analysis which says it will work at level C. I can't tell you how much of a degradation that is over existing levels. I would have to get back on that.
Just those intersections aren't there right now. So
Right.
So there's zero. I mean, maybe an A or whatever. It's not rated because they aren't intersections.
Right. They are merge areas for the ramps.
Yeah,
too.
but there's no intersection. That's where I don't know what for example, the current rating for the B and Snelling intersection is, but these are brand new intersections with zero rating because there's no waiting right now. There's just a road.
And just to clarify, it does not appear that the Snelling traffic stops on the south side of 36. Just because there's no crosswalks going across east-west, I'm presuming that may just be a stop for the people coming on and off.
I think it's still signalized.
Or I suppose it has to be
Yeah.
because you have left turners.
These are just the crosswalks.
yeah,
They're
you'll
marked,
have
not the
you'll have left
signals.
turners there still
Yep.
trying to get off Snelling to go east. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, these would both be signalized.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's my concern. My concern is that we're building in congestion, and I wonder about building in congestion. And this is an area that is really congested.
Of course, the converse of that, I suppose, is that I'm not arguing for one versus the other, but perhaps one of the arguments that is being made is that by adding that congestion, it's also a way to control speed and increase safety to a certain degree. Although obviously intersections always have a safety concern
Safety,
associated with them.
Yeah.
So there's
It's the
trade-offs.
conflicts.
There's
It's the number of
trade-offs.
conflict points.
Yeah.
And I would
Did
think
you have other questions?
That's all for now. Thank you.
Right. I did want to try to catch everybody if you've got other questions or comments or feedback, Councilmember Groff.
Not anything particular. I wasn't curious. I'm glad you clarified that those are signalized intersections. So that would be one at County Road B, one at the entrance exit going that direction, then one further, and then also at, well, then it wouldn't be till C, I guess, after that.
Oh, that's true.
B2 will still be there.
Yeah,
But not a
But not a
signal.
signal.
That's right.
it will not be signal.
Well,
B2 isn't now. and it's not
Snelling
Oh, I
changed.
mean B. I was
Yeah.
referring.
Yep.
B still
Yeah,
will be
B
signal.
and these two, and
Because
then
that's
F and
what people
C.
try to get across
Yeah.
so much. So, I guess one of the questions I had is if Hamlin does stay there, and I understand the reasons for it. The problem I have encountered is when you're going east on Highway 36, the traffic, and this will be helped by this this reconfiguration, is the traffic merging off of the Snelling ramp. It's too tight, so people are trying to get in and out of there quickly, and that's many times I've seen near misses on that.
Yeah, so I think you're talking about this area here. I'm
Right.
illustrating. This is option 3, which has auxiliary lanes. And so the solid purple line is where there are existing auxiliary lanes, and the dashed would be the additions.
So that would help with that.
Yes.
Okay.
However, that half-mile distance between Snelling and Hamlin is still about half again
Right.
closer than we would want a typical urban freeway interchange to be from the next one.
And then the only other thing is that Commerce Street is a real plus for that area of Glick Lane and kind of west of even Cleveland where I live, because that'll give people an alternate route when they're bicycling or walking. And there are a lot of walkers in that neighborhood that would appreciate that access to without having to go down County Road B.
Other thoughts, questions, comments? I would just wanted to note a couple of things. One is I think I agree with comments that the commerce connection under Snelling is very helpful. I think that's going to help with pedestrian issues and conflicts at B, especially.
Yeah.
Because that's a difficult place to cross, and certainly an unrestricted crossing by having it grade separated is should be helpful. We have to think about that from a public safety point of view too, and just in terms of some of the concerns people have about going under a highway and lighting and visibility and things like that too. But that will no doubt be considered as part of project design going forward when you get to details. But I just wanted to note that. The other thing is, of course, if there's a way to do as many auxiliary lanes as you can, even in a 1A or a 1C, I think that would be helpful because of those acceleration, deceleration issues that are already conflicts right now. The other thing, of course, I don't say this too seriously, but of course the spacing between Fairview and Snelling is the same as the spacing between Hamlin and Snelling in the sense that they're a half mile roughly too.
Yeah.
I don't think any thought was given to closing down the access at Fairview to try to space out those interchanges better for the benefit of 36, because I'm sure there are spillover concerns that would be associated with access to
It is
shopping.
very well used, yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the reason those Hamlin ramps are among the least used
Mm-hmm.
in the study area. And so that's part of the consideration.
Right, and one of the reasons I wanted to ask about the Hamlin ramps is because right now, as you're heading westbound on 36, I believe Hamlin is designated as sort of the suggested place to get off to go to Rosedale.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And so certainly if those close, then there's going to be a different traffic pattern. I'm not sure how many people actually follow the suggestion and use Hamlin to get to Rosedale in the westbound 36 mode, but I do know that that's something that apparently MnDOT wanted people to do, or Rosedale wanted people to do, or whatever. So just hopefully that is taken into account in the thought process that was supposed to be sort of, I think, some overflow capability, and if they go away, that may cause other issues that they were intended to solve at Hamlin. Councilmember Strong.
I just wanted to reiterate, I think the reason, in follow-up to Councilmember Etton's concern, I also shared the concern about adding intersections on Snelling, but as a biker or a walker, there's really no other way you could get across that. People do go incredibly fast as they're coming off of those, accelerating and getting off and on either direction. And so I think the only way that you could actually add pedestrian or bike traffic on that would be to do some type where you have to bring everyone to a complete stop. Otherwise even then I would worry that it would take a little bit of learning to get people to be cognizant of the various speeds that people who aren't in a big vehicle are going.
Great. Do you want to kind of run through the other two alternatives that you have? I know they're kind of outlined in the presentation as well. We stopped at the end of the first one, but
Yeah.
also we have about 5 minutes in our time before we start getting behind on our agenda too. So
I think we've kind of summarized the main differences here. The 1A and 1C have those main features at Snelling. The main difference being the ramps for Hamlin are retained with option 1C, and that reduces the width available for bike and ped facilities on that bridge and at the local intersections. So you have a slightly less optimal bike and ped facility, but you can still exceed what's out there today. And then option 3, which is add the auxiliary lanes. To make that work, the ramps at Hamlin do need to be closed. So that's the main summary, I think, the main takeaway. A couple of other quick visuals to share. On the left, you see a proposed treatment for what would happen at B2. And so again, instead of the sweeping loop ramps that are there today, the intersection gets squared up to a T. And so that would be another,
So there would be a signal intersection.
yes.
would it?
You just
I'm
used
going to
the
make
word
your head
yes.
explode.
You're right. And there it's an offset intersection too.
There's no
They
don't-
crossing
It
capability.
does look offset. Yeah.
I'm not sure
I
that's.
don't know if it's full access though.
Yeah, I can't be certain. I can't be certain on that. I can't imagine we would do an offset intersection when it's so close there.
Yeah, my eyes are real big right now. I mean, offsetting that and putting another, so we'd add 3 signals then in a half mile, and that's I don't like.
I don't know that one's signalized. It looks like it's restricted to just right
It
in,
looks-
right out,
I do-
basically.
You know, I do see some islands there in channelization. So that one may be.
I think there still needs to be definitely deceleration and acceleration lanes when you go to
Yeah.
a right angle turn there, because otherwise you're going to have people in the main traffic lanes that are going to really be coming up the works. But I think
Making a list
it
of
seems like
follow-ups.
what's
I appreciate
planned
that,
there
sir.
is to facilitate the north-south trail
Yeah,
and pedestrian, but not so much crossing at that point.
there are little crosswalk
Yeah.
things there.
Yeah.
Even if I steal your glasses, yeah, I can see those.
Yeah. So okay,
And then there's the Hamlin issue. This is very quickly what the differences between the ramp closures at Hamlin would mean for the pedestrian facilities. And so the main difference is here on the left side, if the ramps were closed, protected bike physical barriers would be possible, like you see in the lower left here. And if the ramps were kept open, that would mean those barriers would need to be painted. We couldn't get enough space for physical barriers to be installed. So that's pretty much it. I think we've addressed a lot of discussion questions already. Anything else that I'm missing? or
Councilmember
we're
Eck?
missing?
You're just bringing up more questions. It's great. I appreciate that. Can you go back that one slide, please? Looking at those pictures, very helpful. Both of us are like, oh yeah, the pictures make it easier. Certainly the picture on the left with the things out of the way would be nice. I'm curious about how the intersection off ramps disappearing create that or help with that, in the sense that there still needs to be a road to St. Christopher's there. So there's still going to be an intersection on the east side of that intersection of what the off ramps are in Hamlin. So we still have an intersection there. We still have the same intersection south of the south of 36. So I'm not sure what's changing there. But right now we have grade separated sidewalks here. And these pictures look to be either a completely barrier separated sidewalk or on grade bike and pedestrian. Right now, students use it all the time. It's very heavily used, very important ped and bike access. So I appreciate that we're thinking about this, but it almost seems like we're downgrading it in the sense right now it's grade separated, and then it would not be, at least on the right side. So I'm not sure how the left side is improved, because I feel like all the same intersections are going to happen. So I'm not sure how that works. And then that right side is actually, I think, a lower safety feature than we have right now.
I think they're just high level conceptual, so I don't think.
Okay,
we would-
but as we think about that, with it currently grade separated, I always find myself feeling much safer when there's a curb than any of these other things. And the barriers, we've often discussed barriers in spots, for example, on County Road B west of Cleveland, and just the maintenance of those things. So I wonder about how that works for the county and their plows and things like that. So I wonder about a lot of those things versus just having a nice big old sidewalk that's grade separated.
So we'll follow up with that as
Thank
well,
you.
because I don't have a good answer.
So my follow-up on that is I think the sidewalks that are existing on that Hamlin Avenue Bridge are very narrow.
Very
and not
deep.
intended
They're
for
big.
bicycle use. And I would guess that the bicycles stay on the roadway most of the time. Just because of that issue too, not kind of being fearful of being on a narrow sidewalk, potentially with pedestrians and a big drop off to the road.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things maybe to look at, because I don't think that Hamlin Bridge was scheduled in the yellow highlighted bridge replacements. So it must be a really good bridge. But it's got some of these issues about the geometry of the bridge. So I think that, if there's a way to potentially create the bike, ability on the road surface, and then look at it if there's ways to expand the sidewalk width to help with the pedestrian side of it, and see how that all looks. Once again, we've got issues with snow storage and when there's plowing on this bridge, there's just not a lot of space for all these things to happen. So there may have to be consideration of some sort of more substantial bridge work on this bridge as part of upcoming projects too. So I didn't want to just say that that's not an option, because it may, of necessity, to facilitate all the crossings, it may need to be. So wanted to point that out. Anything else that we've got?
I got one more for you, because why not talk more, I guess. The two ramps that I find most dangerous in this stretch are the ramp from southbound 35 to eastbound 36, which I use regularly coming from work. There is no room there. The lane is maybe a full lane. And if there's ever snow, then it's not a full lane. And I noticed the bridge is scheduled for replacement, but thinking about that through lane for folks would be super helpful, because people have to merge. And then 100 yards later, there is a through lane for people who are coming north from Cleveland onto eastbound 36. So thinking about how that bridge will work so that we can improve that access from 35 south to 35E. That is a big thing that slows down 36 going eastbound coming out of Minneapolis. Is those cars having to merge. They've come on a tight loop and they have to merge in a very short period of time. It's very dangerous. So
just on
yes,
that,
sir.
You weren't here, I don't think, for the presentation on this summer 36 project.
Go ahead.
And actually, an auxiliary lane is a part of this summer's project in that area to improve so that you don't have to merge right away when you're coming up that ramp.
Okay,
35.
that's a start.
So,
It's pretty narrow when we do the bridge.
they're going to be putting in a full auxiliary lane further.
I'm super excited.
Yeah.
The other piece is that interchange at 35E and 36. Those are some awkward angles that people come in. Again, the tight clover leash that we have, for example, if you're going northbound 35E and coming to westbound 36, that's an intersection my family actually won't take anymore. My parents, my sister's family are coming from Rochester. They won't take that because because of the way the lanes come in and out, and then the people coming southbound 35E then merge in with it. There's so many lanes coming in together, and it's bonkers there from there to Rice Street before the things settle out. So I'd love to see what we're going to do to make that safer.
Yeah.
Or
I'm
understand
going to rebut that, because actually I drive that all the time.
Yeah.
And when they improved it with the change of that interchange, it was a huge improvement over what used to be there.
It is an improvement.
Yeah. And it's great
That's a-
because
that's a
it
relative
pulls
statement.
everything off. So the merging activity takes place outside of the main two lanes, whereas you used to have to try to merge right away into the one of the main two lanes, and that was terrible. Right? A rebuttal of a rebuttal.
Because when you come up, if you're going from Cleveland Avenue,
We're talking about
This is
35E
over
now.
35E.
36. Oh, you're talking about 35. Oh.
Yeah. But we're blood away anyway. No.
It's gonna be 35.
Okay.
We'll let that go.
Thank you.
I just wanted
Sure.
to say that Hamlin those sidewalks, because of how how much the change in grade between the ground and the sidewalk itself, I just wonder if those are ADA compliant because of
At the bridge itself.
yeah.
About,
Mhm.
they are thicker on the approaches.
Mhm.
So.
Well, they're just it's a big step down, so I would think it would be somewhat. There's no. I mean, if I was in a wheelchair, they're not terribly wide. If you had oncoming traffic, I would be afraid for someone that fell down that.
The width is the big issue.
The width, but also it's a
The height.
deep step.
It's the same thing on Victoria.
Yes.
The exact same thing where you got to end up with a 4-foot sidewalk instead of 6
Yep.
or 8, and then there's a big grade separation, which I feel very safe on. But
And it's a
People
huge
might-
wide bridge, but that narrow sidewalk is just amazing.
okay.
We're talking to the county about that.
All right.
Super
We're
duper.
on it.
Thanks.
So you can see there's a
lot of-
50-50
yeah.
on that 35E 36
50,
interchange.
no, let's-
We did hear that comment from several people. Avoid that. I heard that at several of our outreach events.
I will say one thing: it works when people go the right speed for the interchange. The problem that happens is that
Oh.
you get people. No, I'm saying you get people using it every day. You get people coming off of either 36 or 35, and they go the full highway speed, and then slamming their brakes and try to cross 3 lanes to get to that exit, and that really wreaks havoc on people trying to come on. So luckily, it's all offset from the main 2 lanes. That helps, but people need to understand that they've been given a deceleration lane.
I'm not
And
sure
they
that's
shouldn't be diving in and things like that. So there's other issues I think that need to be dealt with there, and I could go on and on and on about that particular interchange.
I
But I
have
won't.
several items to follow up on.
Yes.
So watch for my email.
Might be more than a year before.
Thank you, Mr. Outland. Yeah. Yep.
He's not gonna come back now.
I bet he enjoys these kinds
You were
of
nice to
sessions.
him.
We still maintain it was last fall. I'm gonna check that.
All right.
March.
With that, we've got a lot more business before us this evening, so appreciate you being here with the update
Thank
and
you.
tolerating our feedback here. And
No, this is very helpful. I'm very appreciative.
Thank you.
thank you again. All right, that then brings us to our second business item. Having taken item A out of our business items this evening, we're up to item 7C, which is to hear about and discuss potential policies and strategies related to smoke-free multifamily housing. And I'll turn it over to City Manager Trudgeon to make introduction on this topic. And certainly, if we've got folks from other organizations, feel free to introduce them and invite them to make their presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, we do have representatives from the Association of Non-Smokers here to discuss with you about a variety of multifamily strategies, making multifamily units, I should say, or buildings smoke-free. I did meet with them earlier in the year, and we talked about the range of options that a city can consider. I think often people think about there's an ordinance in place and you have to enforce it and all that thing. There's a lot of other ways to approach it that I found very interesting, and invited them to a work session. You know, there's been interest on the city council over the years about looking at these items, and we occasionally do get residents calling us about that. So I will invite the folks on up to come and talk about that. I would mention that in the packet, I do have information provided by them about the number of units and buildings that are currently smoke-free according to their database, and that is 77 buildings, or for a total of 2,650 units that are smoke-free. Just as a reference, we have 201 multifamily buildings for 7,500 units. So if you do the math, it's about 38% of the buildings, or 35% of the units in Roseville that are currently covered according to the data provided by the Association of Non-Smokers. So with that, Katie and Tara.
Well, and welcome. And if you can just introduce yourselves as you begin your presentation this evening.
Good evening, Mayor Rowe and council members. My name is Katie Engman. I live in the 1400 block of Eldridge Avenue, and I also work at the Association for Non-Smokers Minnesota. I'm just here to introduce my colleague. I work primarily on the point of sale, which you guys have done a great work on over the years, and Roseville has really been a strong leader. So bringing this forward as housing makes sense, and it makes sense to talk about it as a whole city. So thank you, Manager Trudgeon, and I'm going to turn it over to Kara. She knows all this. I don't. I've learned a little bit, but
Thank you,
yeah,
Katie.
go ahead. I'm going to just sit back in the audience
No
and
worries.
watch
Thank
the
you,
world go by.
Katie.
No, just kidding.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor Rowe and council members. It's really wonderful to be with you this evening. Again, my name is Kara Scan. I'm actually a resident in Minneapolis, but I work with Katie at the Association for Non-Smokers Minnesota. I am a program director at Answer, and I also run their Minnesota Prevention Resource Center. I'm here this evening on behalf of my colleague Jackie Seward, who is on family leave, so I will do my best to fill her shoes for you. Before I begin, I just want to acknowledge that Answer and Live Smoke Free are located on the traditional homelands of the Dakota people, and that the land that our organization occupies comes with the legacy of genocide and trauma caused by U.S. law and policy applied to American Indians. With that being said, I also want to just recognize that when I mention tobacco in this presentation, I'm referring to commercial tobacco, which is mass produced, and not sacred tobacco that is used for ceremonial purposes by Indigenous communities. So a little bit about Live Smoke Free. Our goal is to increase smoke-free housing opportunities for everyone, but especially for folks who are disproportionately harmed by secondhand smoke. So the folks who are most vulnerable within our communities. We want a world where everyone has access to safe, clean, healthy air at home, and has access to those smoke-free housing opportunities. As I mentioned earlier, Live Smoke Free is a program of the Association for Non-Smokers Minnesota. We provide free assistance to property owners, managers, and homeowners associations, including condos, townhomes, and cooperatives, with adoption, implementation, and maintenance of equitable smoke-free housing policies. We support residents who are exposed to secondhand smoke and thirdhand smoke in their homes. We have received a number of calls over the years from Roseville residents on this topic, and I know a number of them have reached out to you on this topic as well. We also educate and engage decision makers and the community about the importance of smoke-free housing policies, and we conduct research on this topic, and I will talk about a study that we did within Ramsey County in just a couple slides here. So when we talk about social determinants of health, we're really talking about a number of different components that benefit health. So it's not just access to healthcare. We're talking, and I actually appreciate the conversation tonight about pedestrians and bike transportation. Again, we're talking about the built environment as well. So do people have access to trails for running and walking and biking? Do they have access to nutritious food, education? And in our situation, we're talking about housing and healthy housing. So one component of that is exposure to secondhand smoke where one lives. We all know that secondhand smoke is harmful. I'm not going to belabor that point tonight. I do want to point out, however, that 25% of the U.S. live in multi-unit housing. And there have been numerous studies that show that air transfers pretty easily from unit to unit within multi-unit housing. Center for Energy and Environment, which is a local organization here in the Twin Cities, has studied this a number of times over the years. They have found that all of those tiny little cracks and crevices between units, so we're talking electrical outlets, we're talking about plumbing access panels, even tiny cracks where the wall and the baseboard meet, even underneath carpet, air can transfer from unit to unit from all of those tiny little cracks and crevices. So Center for Energy and the Environment found that when you add up all of those little cracks, it depends on the building and the age of the building, of course, but on the high end, that could translate to about the size of a softball of air transferred, kind of a hole between your unit and your neighbor's unit. So it makes sense that you can smell your neighbor's cooking, and it also makes sense that you can smell your neighbor's secondhand smoke. That being said, approximately 1/3 of residents of multi-unit housing are involuntarily exposed to secondhand smoke where they live. And this is pretty consistent with the local surveying we have done as well when we have asked residents what they have seen in their own homes. There are lots of benefits to smoke-free housing. I can't get into all of them this evening, but we're obviously talking about healthier, cleaner air where folks live. There are certainly market advantages for smoke-free properties, reduced cleaning costs, protecting investments, reduced fire risk, reduced legal liability, fewer resident complaints, potential insurance savings, and eliminating ceiling and ventilation costs. Thank you to Manager Trudgeon for talking about the number of policies that we have here locally. According to our records, and we've been tracking this since the 90s, we're aware of almost 700 policies, and these are voluntary smoke-free policies, I'll mention, within Ramsey County. Here in Roseville, we are aware of 34, and as you heard, that includes over 70 buildings and 2,600 units. So 2 of those 34 properties are common interest communities, which again kind of broadly encompasses condos, townhomes, and cooperatives. Just kind of some landscape of current law as it pertains to smoke-free housing. Back in 2018, the Department of Housing and Urban Development implemented a federal rule prohibiting smoking in public housing, all public housing nationwide. As far as here in Minnesota, we have the Minnesota Clean Indoor Air Act that only prohibits smoking in the common areas of rental properties. So that's a common misconception. It does not cover common interest communities like condos, townhomes, and cooperatives. At the municipal level here in Minnesota, there are currently 2 smoking disclosure policies. So this, again, does not say whether you can or cannot smoke indoors, but it just says that you need to disclose what the policy is pertaining to smoking in the building. So Duluth has a smoking disclosure ordinance for rental properties where the prospective renter needs to be told, kind of like with letter radon, what the smoking policy is for the building before signing that lease. And St. Paul, a few years ago, passed a smoking disclosure ordinance for condominiums. And so before the point of sale, the prospective buyer needs to be notified in terms of what that smoking policy is for the property. In terms of other states, 84 municipalities in California have laws that prohibit smoking in 100% of private units and rental multi-unit housing properties. I will say that most of those also include condos, and there are a number of additional municipalities and counties within California that have partial coverage. As far as smoking policy disclosure, Maine, Oregon, Rockland County, New York City, Oakland, California, and San Francisco, California. So from our perspective, why should Minnesota cities consider to implement smoke-free housing protections for residents? Stating the obvious, protecting multi-unit housing residents and staff and guests from commercial tobacco and cannabis smoke. I will say we are getting lots and lots of calls about secondhand cannabis smoke to our office. Protecting health equity. I didn't talk a lot about this, but we know that the folks who are being exposed to secondhand smoke the greatest are the most vulnerable in our communities and tend to be low wage earners or people of color. Reducing fire risk in our community. The Minnesota State Fire Marshal has said year after year that the number 1 cause of known fire related death is due to smoking materials. So again, this is a great way to reduce fire risk as well. Attracting new residents to a community that values health, and a majority of renters want these protections. This isn't just true in our surveying, but the Minnesota Adult Tobacco Survey has also shown that this is what people want. The majority of Minnesotans are non-smokers, but even smokers and non-smokers both, as a whole, want smoke-free housing. I mentioned earlier there's been some local surveying done on this. So there was a Ramsey County survey that was done in collaboration between Answer and St. Paul, Ramsey County, St. Paul Public Health. Of that survey, there were over 518 respondents. Almost half of respondents stated that they were exposed to secondhand smoke at least a few times a year. And not surprisingly, of the smoking allowed properties, respondents with lower incomes or who identified as people of color were overrepresented in those smoking permitted properties. Data shows community support. So I just wanted to emphasize again, although most people don't allow smoking in their units, Ramsey County renters are still exposed to secondhand smoke in their homes. And secondly, renters support citywide smoke-free housing protections. So just wanted to highlight, in our surveying, 91% supported a citywide smoking disclosure ordinance like radon and lead, and 78% supported a citywide smoke-free housing related ordinance. Just a little bit about some of these different options to consider. A smoke-free, and I'm sorry, I should say a smoking policy disclosure ordinance. It requires landlords or homeowners associations to inform prospective tenants and buyers what the smoking policy is for the building. So whether it is allowed or prohibited, and where on the property it is allowed. And similar to laws requiring property owners to warn prospective renters of or purchasers of buildings that contain lead-based paint or radon. So what could a policy like this cover? It could cover rental properties, it could cover common interest communities like condos and townhomes, or it could cover both of those multi-unit housing entities. A few just benefits and considerations of smoking policy disclosure ordinances. Benefits, it increases property owner education. It improves resident awareness and protection of secondhand smoke and smoke-free policies. It could increase the adoption of smoke-free policies. We saw this as a positive side effect when the St. Paul disclosure ordinance went into effect, as a lot of condos chose to go smoke-free during that point in time. These are fairly easy to implement, and they're unlikely to be legally challenged. A few considerations, of course, adoption of smoke-free policies are not guaranteed with disclosure policies, and theoretically, residents exposed to secondhand smoke may have difficulty getting relief. For example, a manager could say, well, you knew there was smoking when you moved in, so I'm not going to do anything about it. But again, kind of a theoretical consideration there. In terms of a smoke-free policy ordinance, so this would require that multi-unit residential buildings would have a smoke-free or a no smoking policy that covers 100% of the indoors. That's really our floor to ensure that you're getting all of the benefits of a smoke-free policy. So that could cover all multi-unit properties, some multi-unit properties, so that could be rentals or common interest communities, again, or both. It could be new developments only moving forward at a certain point, or it could be all properties phased in over time. Some benefits and considerations. Benefits: broad resident and staff protection, improves awareness of, again, secondhand smoke and smoke-free policies, and really levels the playing field between different communities and properties and management companies. Considerations, we want to ensure that equitable enforcement is a priority. We also recognize that housing instability is also a public health threat, and we want to ensure that everyone gets to stay in their home. We just want to make sure that they are have access to healthy, clean indoor air at home. So with that said, promoting the goal of compliance and not eviction, not steep fines or criminal penalties, that really focusing on equitable enforcement. I will say the Public Health Law Center has a really wonderful public health-based equity-focused model policy as well available for cities. Another consideration is community engagement is necessary for successful implementation. We're lucky here in Minnesota, we have the statewide health improvement partnership that provides resources and support to communities on this topic that can help with that. Other options that have been considered by communities here in Minnesota are municipal resolutions or a declaration of support for smoke-free housing. Richfield, for example, has done this, creating a city webpage with information for residents. There are a number of cities in Minnesota that have implemented that. Hosting a city-sponsored lunch and learn for property managers to talk about this, or have, for example, Answer come in and talk about the resources available for properties for free. Another option cities have considered is decreasing the rental licensing fee for cities that have a smoke-free policy, or the flip side of that is increasing fees for properties that do not have a smoke-free policy. Another option is requiring city-funded multi-unit housing development or rehabilitation projects to be smoke-free as a condition of receiving those city funds. Just a few takeaways. Secondhand smoke exposure, it's harmful and it remains a prevalent and pervasive health hazard all throughout Minnesota. Disparities persist among those who are exposed to second and third-hand smoke, and the vast majority of residents support smoke-free policies for their buildings and their communities. As I mentioned, an equity-centered, public health-focused model policy is available, and there are resources available that exist to support policy implementation. Thank you for listening, and with that, I will take any questions.
Great. Thank you again. I appreciate you being here this evening, and you did an admirable job filling in for your associate, in my opinion. With that, are there any questions or feedback from? Actually, let's start with questions maybe right now, and then we can get into discussion if we need to. Are there questions or clarifications any council members would like to have? Councilmember Rattler.
One of the things I'm sure you're aware, certainly your colleague who prepared this is aware that we have a resident who's been quite vocal about concerns with buying into a community that said they were smoke-free but aren't smoke-free. And with some of these steps, you run into that same problem, essentially a grandfathered policy or they're smoking, but we're not going to pay attention. Are there any points from things we've learned from other places about how to handle these kinds of issues?
Yeah, great question. And I will just say that we do have a whole toolkit on compliance and enforcement for properties that we can provide free of charge and technical support. That being said, we do have a lot of, we encourage properties to have everything written. So we have really excellent policy language from the Public Health Law Center. We have really everything should be documented. So for example, for one, we don't recommend permanently exempting any smokers in a building. That, again, we don't consider that to be a smoke-free property. So if there are, for example, say fixed term leases where, and many of you are probably aware of this, you can't break lease terms mid-lease. So for example, if someone refuses to sign on to a smoke-free policy, say before their lease is up, we make it very clear to managers that they need to notify all new residents moving into the property what the smoking policy is for the property, that the property is transitioning to be smoke-free. They may still smell smoke until X date, until the person to most recently sign a lease has signed that smoke-free policy. So I would say part of that issue tends to be honestly confusion from multiple parties in terms of what policy details are, what that timeline is, what that transition is. And we have a number of different resources that we could provide for that situation. Does that answer your question?
Maybe. It's a condo community, so it's a purchase thing, not a lease thing.
Oh, a purchase, okay.
It's the board choosing to not, or from this perspective, choosing to not enforce their own rules. So I think that's an example of a problem that we have right now, and I wonder how these things help or don't help with that. So I think that's something we need help probably moving forward with, how these things would interact with enforcement. But certainly this is a present situation for this person.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is part of the appeal of having a city-based policy is, again, it kind of levels the playing field. It's the same rules for everybody. And in terms of kind of what that process looks like for following up, say, with a manager or a board that doesn't, say, enforce their own policy. I was gonna say I could talk for another hour about that, but that's probably, you guys are probably like, we're done with this. We do have, as I mentioned, we have put a lot of time and thought in the Public Health Law Center into kind of a model policy that has a very robust enforcement mechanism available for cities that offers a lot of support in that process. So, but again, I think that's part of the appeal of a city policy is that helps put more pressure on other, building-based entities for enforcing those policies.
Yeah, us enforcing that's very difficult to do. Right.
Well, I think
Showing up
that's
when
one-
someone's smoking
one of
and
the
knowing which
challenges.
room it is and whatever. So yeah.
Right. Councilmember Groff.
That is the one that I'm sure on the council have all heard, because someone purchased and it's not easy for that person to get out of the unit. So now they've been basically living in their car a lot of the time because they can't stand the smoke. And the management says, unless you catch the person smoking in the act, we aren't going to do anything. So that would be something that would be helpful. Perhaps the educational component would maybe be a tiny step towards it. Sometimes if you have that available for the management, maybe it would help us. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that is a big issue here.
Yep.
Councilmember Schroeder.
I'd like you to address the cannabis part. I know that there's still a lot of loose ends in what's coming down from the state on where and all of that. And so are you saying that you would lump cannabis in with all other smoking then?
We're seeing the cities want to be proactive about it. And so just to clarify, and again, to your point, there's a lot of discussions happening right now at the legislature. So as I'm aware, currently as the law stands, currently smoking of cannabis is allowed in multi-unit housing until March 1st, 2025. And so the law was written after March 1st, 2025. The smoking of cannabis will no longer be allowed in multi-unit housing per state law. So there are also some kind of points that are unclear within the law. For example, multi-unit housing isn't defined. So there's some gray area there that I think is still being worked out at the state legislature. But I will say, what in our conversations with cities and public health, I'd say that most are considering lumping that in as a proactive measure because there is so much gray area and they're not sure whether or not that will be. included at the state level moving forward.
And one more question. What about the rights of the smokers? So if you are saying you can't, and when you say that the low income people are affected the most, do you know what percentage of low income are smokers? Because I'm just trying to make sure that if you know, we want to make sure and balance people's rights, and so I'm just kind of curious. One, if you know how many are smoking, and then what about their rights to smoke? How do we handle that?
Yes, great questions. So I guess I'll just this is I'm not a lawyer hat, but this is my
And we know it's not
quoting
good
the law.
for them.
So-
we know it's not good, but there's a lot of things we choose that are not healthy habits.
Absolutely. Nope.
Yes.
I hear you loud and clear. So under the eyes of the law, there are no legal protections for the act of smoking. So if we look at kind of federal law or state law, we're looking at, for example, freedom of speech or freedom to assemble. Like these are things that have legal protection in the eyes of the law. Smoking has never been deemed a protected category of person or a protected activity under the eyes of the law. And so from a legal perspective, like that's not really a thing. I'd say we recognize, nicotine addiction is a very, very significant addiction.
Yes.
The tobacco industry has preyed on different communities for decades. So there's a lot of layers to this that we don't take lightly when we're talking about smoke-free policies. I will emphasize that smoke-free housing is not smoker-free housing. So people who are smokers can absolutely live in smoke-free housing. And as I mentioned again, surveys have shown that smokers also want smoke-free housing because they don't want their clothes to smell, their furniture to smell. From a real estate perspective, I've talked to realtors who have said that it's really, really hard to sell, for example, a condo in a building that smells like smoke because the prospective renter comes in and says, I'm going to have to tear out the carpet and redo this and that and that. So it's absolutely not smoker-free housing. So we talk a lot about this is about the smoke, not the smoker. So again, this isn't all not tobacco, right? There are other ways to use tobacco that don't involve smoke. So that being said, we also recognize that, this is not also a policy that's implemented overnight or over the course of a month. This is a transition with a lot of support for the residents in the building, support for managers. And so residents feel prepared as that policy is being implemented. In terms of the percentage of adults who are smokers, 22% of the general population. Thank you. I was not going to remember that off the top of my head. So again, we're talking about very small, but again, folks who need support. We have staff members who have been trained in tobacco cessation, and that's something, a support that we provide during that smoke-free policy implementation too. Not that smokers have to quit. Again, they don't have to quit to live in smoke-free housing, but if they want to quit, and we're told that a lot of smokers like smoke-free policies because it helps them cut back on how much they're smoking. And a positive side effect is it also is kind of a little bump for a lot of people to quit smoking. So,
Thank you.
Other questions? Councilmember Strong.
This question is for Attorney Tierney. What would be the legality of decreasing the licensing fee for smoke-free policy buildings?
Councilmember Strand, you would need to, as I'm sure you're all familiar, fees are based on costs. So your license fee needs to reflect the costs of providing that service, of whatever service it is you provide to a licensed establishment. So you would need to demonstrate that a building that was not smoke-free is a higher cost to the city than a building that is smoke-free in order to justify that disparity. Thank you.
That was a good question. So it's not, and just to follow up on that if I may, so it's not just the case where if you cover your overall costs of a program, even though there's a disparity in the fees between smoke-free policy buildings and non-smoke-free policy buildings, that doesn't meet that requirement. You're saying that it has to be based on the specific difference in cost to the city being a smoke-free building versus not, instead of just how you distribute who pays for the overall inspection and licensing program.
Exactly. There are certainly other examples. Liquor licenses, for example, get more expensive when the place gets bigger because a larger establishment is serving more people. There are ways to distinguish between one license type and another, even within the same category. But all laws that a city passes have to have a rational basis, and so you have to be able to explain why is it more expensive to have a building that allows smoking than a building that doesn't. And license fees are not a place to achieve policy objectives. That's not what fees are.
And if I can follow up along this line of thought, if the city, or could the city consider a building, if it has a smoke-free policy and they don't, and there's evidence of non-enforcement of that policy, is that something that could be added as a consideration for the city's looking at their license and whether or not to renew or whether to impose some sort of penalty associated with that license? I just want to kind of talk through, is that something that is something that the city could look at?
Yeah, Mayor Rowe, absolutely. In the same way that you have tobacco or liquor licenses that come in front of you when they violate they fail a compliance check, you penalize them, and if you get them enough penalties, you can revoke a license. Those actions for councils, though, become very more difficult when you're talking about housing, because the ultimate consequence of revoking a rental license is evicting everyone who lives there.
Then that's something we dealt with in terms of we have revoked licenses before, and the question is how does that work? And in the case of the particular case where it was like code violations and things like that, it was revoked, but everybody could still live there. They just couldn't rent to new people as units became vacant. That was sort of the penalty associated with it. So I would imagine that would be similar to this, and that there would be a chance to perhaps reinstate and get rid of that inability to rent to new tenants on vacant units.
Of course, Mayor Rowe, and there would be a whole lot of steps between no violations and they simply won't comply. But at the end of the day, nothing else works, right? So probably a bit of an extreme hypothetical, but it is where it ends at revocation of the license. You can't ever get a licensee compliant and you want to enforce your law. At some point, that's the consequence you end at.
And
really long path there, but
and you said enforce our law. Can we put those requirements in place if it's a voluntary policy of the building? You know, the management of the building has the voluntary smoke-free policy that they are not enforcing. Can we do anything about that through our licensing enforcement, or is it only if we have a smoke-free law in place?
Your tool is laws.
Okay, that's why I just want to clarify that. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Councilmember Strong.
Just clarifying, we wouldn't be able to utilize something like our nuisance policy currently we use for the hotels and such. There's no mechanism for utilizing something like that in this situation.
It would have to meet the definition of nuisance, which I suppose there's an extreme circumstance where secondhand smoke could be considered a nuisance, but I can't say that I've ever seen it.
So we would be breaking new ground if we did that. New legal ground.
Yes.
Okay.
If I may, there have been, and I'm not gonna, I can look this up and send it to you, but there have been some communities nationwide that have amended their nuisance clause to include secondhand smoke. I can look that up. I don't know off the top of my head remember, but.
I was going to say, I don't know that that's included in our current nuisance code, so, or at least not specifically and well articulated. It might be potentially generally included in some broad language, but that would be interesting to try to deal with in its current form. Other questions or comments? And I did want to check, is there anyone from the public who wished to speak to this item this evening? I know we've got a few people from the public here. Is there anyone from the public who wanted to provide some feedback to the city? Right, doesn't appear to be the case. So council, I think the request from staff is to perhaps provide some thoughts as to, do we want to, I guess that's kind of the threshold, do we want to look at some things we can do in this area? And do we have an idea of what those might be? If so, and do we want to direct a process to perhaps start for the city to look at that. Thoughts from the council in that regard? And it's open to whatever we want to do. Councilmember Strong.
Well, first, I would be supportive of a smoke-free policy disclosure ordinance. Obviously, would not help the person that we've heard a lot of, but I think it could help others. And if there was some type of interface where that was somehow connected to resources that person could easily obtain, but that seems like a something that would be quite doable. And I also would I think we could consider a declaration of support for smoke-free housing. I think I still have other reservations on some of the other ideas at the moment, given some of the questions and concerns people have raised.
Right. Other thoughts? I would tend to concur with some of those points. Councilmember Adam.
I would concur with a lot of those points. The disclosure piece is something that I would be prepared to do, and then having those education pieces, both things on a website as well as some outreach to those properties. We certainly have a lot of, because of our licensing program, a lot of abilities to contact folks and channels for communicating. So I would be in favor of those pieces as something to look at in the near future here.
Other thoughts from Councilmember Groff?
Yes, I think I agree with both those items, and especially the educational part or some contact with the management.
Mm-hmm.
That's more than just sending them something, and I don't know what that is yet, but I think we need to imprint on their brains that this is a thing we're paying attention to, and it might go further than this if we don't get compliance, because that's where we're really having a problem.
And Councilmember Shorter.
I guess it doesn't hurt to get more information. I'm going to withhold my support on things until I know more. This is the first time looking at this, so I don't want to commit to anything from that aspect. And I'm concerned about doing anything that we have to dedicate resources to enforce, because it seems to me the only thing, if you're going to force a management team to enforce it, then they'd have to evict people, and I'm very not comfortable with that thought. So if we're going even deeper into that, I want to make sure that yes, I think we all understand smoking is bad. But as we said, people are addicted to smoking, and there's some of this going on. And so education, I think, is always good. But I just want to be careful about any time we want to enforce, because if we're going to put something in and we have to enforce it, we have to make sure we're enforcing it. So, I'm just saying, let's look at it, but be careful how far we take it.
Sure. Well, I think the disclosure requirement is just that we're requiring properties to disclose to prospective tenants or purchasers what their policy is.
And I just want to see how that's done.
So hopefully that doesn't lead to evictions. But I understand your concerns, and I would say that even if we were to enact a smoke-free requirement for all multifamily, I would not want it to be designed to create the opportunity to evict people. That's not what we do with our licensing program, and this would be contrary to that. So I'm sure that's not what's recommended by this organization or others.
That's actually, eviction is
Yes.
absolutely
Yeah.
not in our model policy.
And certainly, I think a key stakeholder to engage with is the Minnesota Family Multi-Housing Association as well, because they have that perspective as well. Just specifically on the disclosure policy, I think it's important to note that I believe it should apply to both rental as well as ownership. Because I think that gets at that particular situation, with the condos. Once again, it's disclosure, but it does seem to have knock-on effects, which are positive. So, that's a starting point. I like the notion of the education part of it. I think there's things we can do to connect people to resources as a city, and also to connect with, especially multifamily rental properties who are in our licensing program and look at education opportunities. We already talked about doing that with respect to other aspects of providing rental housing in the community, so that falls in line with that. I also am interested to talk about thinking about how we look at projects that the city helps to fund. I think that we have some ability in those cases to look at potentially requiring restrictions as a result of receiving city funds for a project, and so I'm open to talking about it. I think we need to know more once again, as Councilmember Schroeder said. But I would add that to the list of things to maybe bring back for further discussion. I think that the fallback is that depending on how we progress in this issue, as Councilmember Groff said, we may have to subsequently looking at a more substantial city policy. But I think there's a whole host of, as we talked about with enforcement, there's a whole host of things that have to happen before we get to that point, and certainly would be a lot of discussions we would want to have with the community and others before we put that type of full-fledged city smoke-free multifamily policy into effect. But I think these are some things we can do to try to affect some change in a positive way, and hopefully relatively minor towards our use resources as a city. Councilmember Strong.
I was just wondering if we needed to formalize a declaration of support of smoke-free housing by putting the educational materials on our website and such. We are implying, but should we take a more formal approach and say we do support smoke-free housing? I don't think it's at the cost of non-smoke-free housing, but I just wonder if we're kind of saying we support it if we are doing educational programming. Do we take a bolder stand and say we do support it and here's the resources because of that? I guess it's just a matter of intention and of what our statement is that we're making. But I appreciate the other comments.
It's something to maybe think about. I'm not always sure that our declarations of things have much impact that we think they do, but at the same time, one aspect might be looking at, is this something we want to advocate for? Like we looked at with some of the Minnesota Clean Indoor Air Act and things like that. It was sort of some cities and some counties that were restricting smoking in public spaces, and then eventually it became, a statewide requirement. And so I think that we may want to look at, as we talk about our legislative priorities, if this is something we want to add to that, to be advocates of. That might be a way of getting at that has more, theoretically, a little more effectiveness, because it's pointed at people who can make decisions, if that makes sense. Right. Seeing no objection to that, I think that staff, do you feel like, Pat, that you've got a pretty good handle on kind of what we would like to see come back?
And specificity, and we'll work looking at a disclosure ordinance. I think with the education, there's a lot of opportunities we can do. I would note that just recently we were partnering with Brighton and Mounds View in gathering property owners on a quarterly basis to meet about whatever issues there is. So that can be very easily set up. I'm not sure the attendance is great, but it's something to start with, and we can look at that and then try to do some research on the declaration of support, what that looks like, and just maybe what other cities have done, and bring some of that back for discussion and see it in black and white as far as what that ordinance would look like, and we can kind of go from there. I know they have a lot of resources. They've already provided me a lot, so we'll continue to work with them to get additional information and bring something back.
Right, and this is probably a good topic to kind of have a plan ahead of time as to how we're going to do engagement on some of these decision making. So it'd be important to make that a part of what we're talking about as we bring things back. Right. Yep. Very good. Thank you again for being here this evening and bringing forward this issue for our consideration. Thanks. And I'm sure you'll be a continued resource for us as we go forward. Yeah. All right. With that, then we've got another business item 7D, which is to consider. Oh, do we need to do our break? All right. Let's do a 5-minute break then. Thanks. No, I looked up the clock.
Works to me.
calendar. We're back from a short break, and I do just want to apologize. I think we had some audio issues with the ability of people to hear our presenters at the table, certainly in the room here, and if not elsewhere or elsewise.
The feed was fine.
So, okay, good to know. I apologize to people in the room here, especially who weren't able to hear all the presenters very well. We apologize for that. I think we've made the adjustments, so hopefully it's all better. With that, then we're moving to item 7D once again, which is to consider a request from Kids in Need Foundation related to the state bonding funding for this legislative session. And I'll turn it over once again to City Manager Trudgeon to introduce this item. And I think we've got some representatives of Kids in Need as well who will be here this evening. Mr. Trudgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll try to be brief. I know the council has a lot of background on this, and I try to put it into the case as well, and let Kids in Need talk about their request. But just some basics here. So Kids in Need Foundation is a great organization that provides resources to students and teachers that are located in our community. And actually, it's the headquarters, as I understand it, for the nationwide effort they have throughout the country. As a result of every meal being able to purchase their building from receiving state funding, they are looking for a new place to locate, and they also have some space needs as well that they need to have addressed in any case. So they are looking at possibly relocating to the former Department of Education building that came up earlier today for the new headquarters, warehouse, and teacher resource center. And they estimate that project cost to be about $10 million. As I mentioned last year, a lot of nonprofits did receive funding from the state. If you will recall, the state had a very large cash surplus. And this is something I learned along the way here. I thought it was bonding dollars all along. They actually received dollars, those nonprofits, from the cash reserves. As we come into this session, Kids in Need Foundation is looking for some state assistance to relocate, given its support statewide of teachers and students. And given that there is a less of a cash reserve on the state level, that would not be possible for them to receive direct funding. So the only other way for the Kids in Need to receive bonding dollars is for the city of Roseville to actually receive the funding, because it's tax exempt bonds that are issued to fund that. So we would need to be involved very directly into the process. And this is not simply a pass through that we receive the money and pass along. We have to have an ownership interest in the building itself. We would need to ensure that the public purposes as outlined in the award and the legislation is met for what I have been told 125% of the lifetime of the project, which is 40 years. We have to make sure that construction is done according to the plan state approved plans, as well as making sure compliance and a whole heck of a lot of issues, including sustainable wages and all the other reporting. In addition, there is a lot of paperwork, I guess, to do and reporting to make sure throughout that 40 years that the public purpose is being met, and continually reporting back to the state. If any of those things don't happen along the way, technically the city's on the hook to return those dollars back to the state. Now, I mentioned that there are ways to work through all that. You can get into a long-term lease, you can have construction management contracts, and long-term operating agreements, but all that would need to be created by the city, most likely at our cost, as well as even if you have those agreements, there'll still be use of staff to make sure those agreements are in place and monitoring all those type of things. So it is a significant investment, I guess you could say, both in actual dollars maybe and certainly staff resources in doing this. And I do raise those concerns in there. I would mention that it's got nothing to do with the organization. We think it's a great organization. Our employees have volunteered there in the past and will continue to do that. It's just as I look at the responsibilities the city has to take on, I do have some concerns about whether we have the capacity to do that. Also concerned about the future liability on that. And then third, I think we have a lot of projects and organizations like this that certainly appreciate similar type of assistance from the city. And I am conflicted on helping one without opening the door for others, or how do we select which ones we help and don't help. And so anyway, those are my reservations. I just wanted to make sure that that was clear, and it's not about the organization. It's just about additional responsibilities we as a city would need to take. Kids in Need is here. I can't see them. So I'll wait them up. I think Corey Gordon will be coming up representing. And I would mention that there is a bill that's been introduced down to the legislature that is ready to be taking action, as I understand it, to get potentially included into some type of budget bill down the road. So time is short. By third week in May, I think, is the last days of the session. So clock is ticking here. So with that, I'll have Corey.
Actually, before we have, I just wanted to maybe if there's some questions that the staff council has for staff specifically, I wanted to do that step first, and then we'll turn it over to Kids in Need for their presentation. And my first question is, you talked about ownership interest. Is it a partial ownership interest on the part of the city, or do we own the building outright as a result of this?
Probably the simplest way is to own it outright, but I think there's some ways you can. Now I'm going to look to.
But ultimately, we have the responsibility.
That somebody owns it. We lead into a long-term lease, so we have ownership interest, and we lease it back.
Okay. And is it that we own the building?
I think in situations like this, what's commonly happening is that the nonprofit would acquire the property, then they would lease the property to the city, who would lease it back to the nonprofit, and then there'd be, so just the document structure is that the city would enter into a grant agreement with the state to receive the funds. Then the funds would be used to purchase the property on behalf of the nonprofit, who would lease it to the city, who would lease it back to the nonprofit. And then as part of that transaction, the city would enter, and you guys can jump in if I'm getting a little of this wrong, but the city would enter into a use agreement with the nonprofit as well to conduct the program, the project, which has to be what the state legislation says it is. So in this case, it's operating a nonprofit that provides school supplies to teachers in a teacher training location, facilities for training teachers. So that's what the program is. But the legislation requires that if for some reason this organization goes away, that the city takes over that program.
So we take over the program?
Yes.
Because that's what's being funded.
Because that's what's being funded. Yes.
Okay. So from what you're saying, Mr. A, it does not sound like the city actually has ownership of the building. We have ownership of the program.
You don't have to have I am not the best person to explain the federal tax law as it relates to tax exempt properties. I know just enough to be dangerous. And so the federal law requires that you own it, but they consider you having a lease that will last for 125% of the life of the project to be a sufficient to rise to the level of what they would consider an ownership interest.
Okay.
So to the federal government, to the tax laws, it's equivalent. You don't have to actually own it. You can have 125% lease. And I don't know what the life of the project would be, but what I'm hearing is ballpark 30 years. So you would have maybe a 45-year lease.
All right. Thank you for clarifying that. Are there other questions for staff at this time? And we'll certainly, if you can clarify any of those points, feel free to do so when we get into the presentation from you, Councilor Schroeder.
Yes. Would being in taking on these bonds affect our ability to take on bonds to do the city's projects then? Would this go against our rating?
No, Councilor Short, I don't believe so, because we'd be receiving a grant. So we're not actually borrowing. If we were to borrow for a maintenance center or something
But it
else,
doesn't show up as a liability then on our.
it's money in, money out.
Okay. I just
No.
wanted.
I think there is a liability there, as the city attorney outlined, that we have to take over the program, but I'm not sure you can quantify that in exact dollars at this point. Would not be held against us for debt service.
Right. We are not issuing
We're not
bonds.
issuing
It's the state issuing their state general obligation bonds, a portion of the proceeds of which would go to this as well as other projects around the state. That's typically how the state bonding program works. So yeah, I couldn't see how it would affect our ability to borrow funds or anything like that. Any other questions? Councilmember Strong.
So if the program were to no longer be in operation and it were to come back to us, we would have to conduct the program or make a decision as an organization to change what the scope of the program was?
Or give the money back, I suppose.
Sort of. You would have to, because they're tax exempt bonds, you've got bondholders who have their ability to continue to hold bonds that are exempt from federal taxes relies on the continuation of this program. So the city would need to take over the program. I don't know whether it could be modified. That's just a little bit outside of my bailiwick, but I'm going to say it can't. It is tied to the original legislation that created the program. I suppose it's possible you could go back to the legislature and get it amended, but I just really don't know the answer to that. But if you fail to continue the program, which doesn't mean that you actually have to have city employees now operating the program, you could contract with another nonprofit who can then operate the program, but you are responsible to make sure the program keeps operating. If you fail that responsibility, it could happen that the state could come to you to pay the money back.
All right.
I will-
One more question. Right?
You said that the bill was introduced. Did the city have any input, or was the city involved before the bill was introduced?
No, we weren't. So we're shorter.
So we weren't involved with that part of it before. Okay.
I didn't see any of the drafting. I saw a draft after I asked about the status, and so I saw a draft, but we had no part in writing that. And then I learned last week that it had been introduced.
Okay. Thank you.
And that brought up, I did have a second question, and that was the mechanism that the city has to undertake. I mean, do we have to provide some sort of documentation to the legislature of our support of the bill or our willingness to accept? Okay. I thought there was something in the materials about that, and I just wanted to make sure. So there's something we have to proactively do as a decision by the city in order for this to work. If the legislature were to pass the legislation and we didn't do our part, then it doesn't complete the circle, so to speak.
Correct.
Okay.
And I'm not sure of the exact timing. I think, obviously when we're down there for bonding, we show the legislature that we support this. So I'm not sure if that has to happen before the legislature would include that in, if that's where they want to go. Certainly before we receive any funds, we would need to make sure we have all that paperwork including that.
Okay. All right. That I wanted to clarify. All right. Appreciate that. Thank you for indulging our questions here. You can imagine that this is something that we're not, if our attorney is not an expert in it, we're at sea ourselves. So we appreciate your patience for that question and answer. And I'm sure to the extent you can fill in additional information, that will be appreciated as well. So now feel free to introduce yourselves, and we look forward to hearing from you this evening.
Well, good evening, Mayor Rowe, council members. Back, good seeing you again. I'm Corey Gordon, CEO of Kids in Need Foundation.
Hi, Mayor Rowe, council members. My name is Molly Jansen. I'm a constituent in the city of Roseville, and I work as a lobbyist at the firm representing Kids in Need Foundation at the Capitol.
Great.
And I understand that the GO bond process and route is new for the city, so the questions are not at all concerning. I think there are some, largely a lot of what Pat and you brought up, but we would agree that I think in terms of some of the risk exposures, costs, et cetera, we'd be happy if the city wants to take all those on, but you're actually speaking for a lot that we would actually be taking on. So I think both in terms of the risk exposure as well as the significant portion of cost components are actually costs that would be on Kids in Need Foundation, not the city. For someone not being familiar with all aspects of the GO bond, I think your attorney has done an admirable job of explaining and recommending. There are some risks associated for the city. There are some opportunities. It's a $10 million project. We're looking for the state to provide 50%. The rest of it would come from corporate and private sources that have funded the organization for 30 years. And the burden on the city really is as a fiscal agent. This route can go through the city or the county. And so we are working with the state legislative session to see if we can get the approval for this. As mentioned, last year there was a surplus of cash And so there was a lot of cash provided. Our building, our lease expires in November, and it was owned by a private equity firm in New York City. Fortunately, because of the cash surplus last year, a nonprofit owns it today, but they bought it not to be a landlord. They bought it for mission purposes. And since our lease will be expiring and we have an extension, we do know that they're anxious to continue on with the mission purposes for which they acquired the building. We would like to stay in the city of Roseville. This is our national headquarters, as Pat mentioned. We serve roughly a third of the teachers that work in the Roseville School District. So Jenny and Melissa have been out to our location as well, and we've talked about some of the ongoing work we'd like to be able to do together. You're also central here, right? So our headquarters is central to the greater Minnesota metro area, that is. And then from here, we serve the entire state of Minnesota. So teachers are able to come to our center and they shop for free. Imagine a kind of like a small FedEx Kinko's workshop area, as well as then a Staples, Office Depot, office stationery, school supply products retail store. Teachers come shop for free, and they come once a quarter to replenish their classroom full of supplies, whether it's for themselves or whether it's for their students. And then if teachers are in the area visiting the Twin Cities, so we have teachers coming from Duluth, coming from Rochester, they can come from anywhere in the state, as well as then we ship supplies directly to school districts, through different programs that we have, where we then, from our center, we act as a distribution hub and we drop shipping supplies directly to these schools all throughout the state. As I said, it's a central location, so we'd love to be able to stay in the area, and so that's why we're working with the city to get the additional funding. It's, as Pat mentioned, it's on the center where the Minnesota Department of Education was based. It's specifically the building which has National American University. So we think it's also a bit poetic justice that a for-profit entity that created millions of dollars of student loan debt is being replaced by someone who's giving away supplies to underserved teachers and students at zero cost to them, completely free to them. And it's a great location where we love to be able to expand our services to offer more support for teachers, but then also for the students themselves, especially at the senior high levels, so juniors and seniors. We are working on programs where there can be not just the kids stay in school to get a diploma, but can they get certification for workforce development, where within we are able to provide them certifications where they can graduate with a diploma, and if a four-year college is not, or university is not in the future for them, can they get certification for jobs that are going to pay beyond minimum wage, but actually put families beyond into a livable working wage scenario. And so, we feel strongly about some of the work that the Roseville School District has already done on that front, and some of the ideas that they have for continuing that, as well as them being able to partner with an NGO that has tremendous corporate support where we can get a continuation of that. It's that tandem that this new location would provide us that we're excited about. So pleased to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. Again, I know that the GO bond process is new to the city, so we appreciate the consideration for us to make the GO bond process work within the state. As Pat noted, it does need to be with the city or the county. And so since we have been here in Roseville for some time, that is an option we would like to be able to continue to explore.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Gordon. I appreciate you being here this evening. I imagine we may have some questions for you. I may kick it off, if I may, just to clarify again, it's not the entire Department of Education and National American University building. It's the National American University part of it.
Correct. So it would be basically 50% of that.
Like the west half.
Correct.
Got it. Okay.
So
just wanted to clarify that.
Exactly.
Yep. And then this may be kind of a tough question, and you may or may not be able to answer it in this public forum, but just curious if for some reason this didn't find its way through the bonding process at the Capitol, despite the priority of the legislator and the excellent lobbying effort of the lobbyists. So do you have sort of a plan B in mind, or is it a situation where you have to find different sources of funding or attempt to borrow money, and or what? I'm sure as an organization you don't just put all your eggs in one basket without having thought about sort of what the other path might be. So just can you talk to us a little bit, if you can,
I'm happy
about
to
what
share.
that is?
It's we're not NSA, so nothing that's top level security clearance here. And the answer is really it's all of the above to what you just articulated. So correct, we're not putting all our eggs in one basket. The geo bond process in of itself has two routes to take, right? You have to have a physical agent as an NGO, but there's two routes that have to be taken. We did pursue the cash grant route. And depending on which legislator you talk to on which day, whether or not that's just completely DOA or whether there's still a chance. I mean, just today at MMB, got another update where revenues look a little bit better and the economies in Minnesota still going green gangbusters, right? And so now does that mean there's a little more money there available? Again, I don't have a crystal ball, but depending on who you talk to on which day, whether or not it's a snowball's chance, not in Minnesota, but somewhere else hotter, or, we might have an outside shot at it, right? So if there's an outside shot at it, that's the route we would prefer to take simply because it's the simplest, the cleanest for everybody, right? However, if it's not the route to take, that's what the geo bond process was really enacted to do, is to, in a kind of a public sector, not-for-profit sector combination to be able to, largely for infrastructure and large improvements, right? And so cities in Minnesota have been doing it for years. And it serves a good purpose, and they're really being the litmus, as your attorney noticed, serving the public good, serving the public interest, right? If neither of the state funding routes were to go, we have some bills that have been dropped in both House and Senate for appropriations, congressionally directed funding, which would be for programmatic support. So there's other things that we would look to do. It's not going to go towards infrastructure support like what we're talking about here. And so in that case, then for us, there would be a pivot where, yes, we wouldn't be able to afford to buy anything outright. A lot of what we do is warehouse. And in terms of commercial realities today, it's upside down. Office space is at a bargain, warehouse space is at a premium, right? And so, that is a challenge, and that's a limiting factor in terms of where we can go. While we like the facility of the Northern University Center and the Education Center, the buildings themselves are not conducive completely to what we would need to be able to do. So there would be an extensive remodel to convert the building into more of a functional space for us. And so that's part of what the expenses, that money that we would be incurring as well, and what we are raising it would be to do some of the renovation, remodeling. Now, if this route completely fails, well, we still have a lease that expires. We still have a cordial relationship with Every Meal. We have an extension. We have all those things in place, but ultimately we do need to move. And but there's not exactly a wealth of building options in the city of Roseville, and so really all of those options would be in an adjacent community. And so yes, we would be looking at purchasing probably we have a backup and another backup to the backup, where it would be, it may not have the full scope of what we were trying to accomplish. Well, for another school district as well, it would be a little bit more work to try to make everything that we're trying to do with the Roseville School District work because of proximity and things like that. It would definitely be a pivot, but the practical aspects of lease and needing space, additional space, as Pat mentioned, it would take us to a different community.
Right. Thank you. I appreciate your candor in answering that. Other questions from council members? Councilmember Atten.
Thanks for being here. You mentioned that you felt like there were some city responsibilities, costs, other things like that you didn't think would need to be city things as they were listed by our city manager. Can you speak to some of those more important, bigger ones, both financial as well as responsibility for the program continuing for 125% of its term?
Yeah, so 125% of, I'm not sure how you peg something like that on an organization that this is all we do and we've done for 30 years thus far, and as long as we stay in existence, we would continue to do so. Mm-hmm. It's a long term. It's an obligation, right? Whether it's 30 years or 40 years, it's a long term either way. Looking at it, right? In terms of program continuation, so there's definitely the risk on that component, unequivocally. That's probably the most obvious and also the most significant risk potential. If Kids in Need Foundation were to fail 5 years from now, 10 years from now, whenever have you, then the city would either need to do a continuation of the services. As your attorney said, it wouldn't be necessarily need to be you yourself doing the work. It could be outsourced to another NGO involved in education support, keeping and continue to serve the public interest in the manner in which the bond was provided, right? Or you could theoretically return, do a clawback and send the money back to the state, so to speak, and say, okay, here, you have the building. So yes, those are the risk components that at the largest, most significant level with exposure for the city. The city on an annual basis would need to file a report with MMB that indicates whether or not in your belief that we as continue to serve the public interests and the public good as per the condition of the bond. If the answer is yes, great. That's really not much more than, on an annualized basis than the city would have to do in terms of all the aspects of construction, real estate. That is on us. We would be paying for those types of expenses. That would be the responsibilities of Kids in Need Foundation. As the fiscal agent, you're not just a pass-through, as Pat mentioned, it's more than that. And it's the continued responsibility of the city to report back to MMB, which would be, again, the other big key factor is just that it's not us saying, yeah, we're serving the public interest, we're doing well. The city would need to concur with that and say, we are fulfilling the obligations of the bond.
Thank you.
Right. Councilmember Groff?
Have you approached Ramsey County? It seems to me like this is more of a larger thing than just Roseville. Have you approached them about this?
Well, it's with all due respect, we do think the city is the first step. As it's mentioned, every year the bonding process has been enacted in Minnesota. For example, St. Paul, Minneapolis, they're of course always taking these bonds and doing these left and right. However, Brooklyn Park did $18 million GO bond with Second Harvest just a few years ago. Even Little Rosemont has done these GO bonds. So it is very much kind of the hometown is who you work with first. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that the state legislator passes the bill and this is approved, right? And the city says there's absolutely no way, we will never do this. Go Pound Sand, Kids in Need Foundation, go away. Whatever the answer is, right? Then it could be a process of going to the county, because the counties also do this. Ramsey County, Hennepin County, Scott, Polk, they have all done these as well. And so it's not an uncommon thing. That is what a GO bond process was intended to accomplish. But that would be the fallback if the state were to approve that this is a bond that they were willing to put a stamp of approval on. Then that would be the other recourse that we would have, would be to have it be redirected through the county.
So to have this pass the legislature, you don't have to have it identified ahead of time in the documentation.
Well, you would list your preference, which for us in this case would be the city of Roseville would be the preference. We'd like to stay in the city of Roseville. Obviously, if it's granted through the county level, as long as we stay within Ramsey County, that would be the difference, right? So if we were to say, there is no other building for us in Roseville, but there are buildings within Ramsey County, that would still fit both the intent and spirit of the process. So since the property we are looking at, it was actually thanks to Pat and his team that introduced us to the Steve Wallington, the owner of the property, and we've had copious conversations now with the said gentleman about the property and walkthroughs. It'd be more appropriate to start with the city than going straight to the county.
Great. Other questions? Well, thank you very much again for being here and helping us through this learning curve here. You probably want to stay handy for other questions. It doesn't mean you have to stay in the hot seat at the table necessarily, but I'm sure you won't leave the room until you hear more from us. So appreciate you being available to answer any additional questions.
As I said, we've been doing this for 30 years. We're happy to work with Roseville. We've been happy here. And so, I know Pat's been out several times. In fact, I believe some of our employees are related to some of the Roseville staff. And so, it's been a good relationship, and we serve approximately a third of the Roseville teachers. And we look forward to being able to do more in terms of not only just the programmatic support we have currently, but as I said, some of the workforce development efforts, especially we feel for the seniors and juniors where they're feeling more and more disconnected in school and high schools, and giving them a purpose where, stay in school, get that diploma, get a certification, get something that will also then give you a purpose for, there's hope, there's reason to stay engaged here. So, and I think at least one of y'all are educators, so it's a reality that you face every day.
Thank you again. All right. Other questions from the council for either staff or attorney, or points of discussion? Where does the council want to go here at this point? Or do we know where we want to go? I know, just I'll speak from my perspective. I know I shared a lot of the concerns that were expressed by the city manager. It may help mitigate some of those concerns, knowing that our responsibility is primarily for the program. I think that still there's some questions I have about sort of this notion of, well, if we do it, how do we determine for whom we do this sort of thing, and what is our sort of precedent we're setting, and how do we deal with the next request that comes, and how does that relate to our capacity to do these things? So I'm not sure I have answers yet on those questions, and I don't know exactly how we get to answers on those necessarily, but I'm still working through it, I think, from my perspective. Other thoughts from council members or questions? I mean, ultimately we can table this, but we probably need to start moving in a direction. Councilmember Schroeder.
Yeah, well, the first thing I want to say, and I think Pat said this, that what we're talking about at this point isn't about the really good work you guys do. I mean, I think we all understand that it's a good program. So that absolutely isn't it. I think what we're trying to decide here is how much of this the city of Roseville wants to take on when it comes to this particular obligation. So I guess that's one thing I just want to make sure, that that's what we're talking about. And I'll have to say, last time we did bonds, it didn't end well, and we had that last little incident, and so I guess I'm a little gun shy from that, and this is very long term, and I don't feel that. I mean, it seems so new, because that's why I asked if we were involved, because I think if we would have had conversations earlier, we would have had more time to, because I feel uncomfortable that I don't know enough about this process and about some of the details, and what am I missing that we're on the hook for, or what nuance. I guess I'm uncomfortable. I don't. At this point, I can't support it because I don't feel I have enough comfort from this point, because we haven't been part of the process, and I know the timing is has to be done quick. So, I guess until we get more comfortable with it, that's where I stand.
Councilmember Strong.
Thank you. I think I've been lobbying for a community center as long as I can remember. So I think when I thought that this building would belong to Roseville, and if in 40 years it became ours and for our use, it's one thing. But to think that at 40 years we have to execute this program as is, that's a bit intimidating. And I applaud you on 30 years of being a nonprofit, but nonprofits do change and do come and go based on the market, and one that I worked for 2 years ago no longer exists. So, it can be somewhat fickle. And I look at your 990s, and you've had some pretty significant changes in income and fundraising based on the market. 2019, 2020, fairly low years. And so I think I share some of that trepidation. Like, there's just, and yet at the same time, like, oh, I'm so excited to hear about this workforce, because that's the future of what we need to do for young people in order for them to survive in our economy and for them to grow as humans. So, I mean, I'm very conflicted, but I feel like there's a lot more questions that this is raised than answered, unfortunately.
And that actually makes a good point. And the questions or the concerns that Councilmember Schroeder have, is it possible at an upcoming meeting to perhaps try to get an expert in this area to come in and help us understand better? I think the key thing on it, once again, is the risk. I think if we understand how it unwinds, if everything goes contrary to everybody's plans and best aspirations, that may help, because I think that's we're as probably is appropriate as holders of the public purse and the public trust. We want to make sure that we understand our risk, and we want to understand how things unwind if things don't go as planned. And so if we perhaps can look at trying to get somebody in the near term to help us with some of that has expertise. Ms. Tierney.
Mayor Rowe, you have someone? Gina Fiorini, your
That's
EDA
kind of what I was
attorney?
thinking.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, she's who I went to start learning more about this. I know a little about it, but she's who I went to learn more. So she can certainly answer more of your questions than I can. So she'll probably be at your next EDA meeting. So that would be an opportunity.
And I was going to look. So our next council meeting is May 6th. Okay, so we've got a couple of weeks, and we're approaching the end of the legislative
May
session.
20th
as
is
well.
the last day. I was looking that up as we're speaking. That's correct, right? May 20th?
That's correct.
We do have a meeting on the 20th, but we have a meeting on the 13th and May 6th. So we would have to hustle to get.
Oh, certainly. And I don't know if it's something that it may work to receive information in the form of some kind of memorandum ahead of the 6th. That might accelerate the process, perhaps. But we still would, I think, need to have a council discussion at that point. So that's just, I'll put that out there as something we may want to think about as one of our next steps here. Councilmember.
I would agree with all of the comments that have been made here, and the concerns and the praise for your work all at the same time. If we were to table this for more information from Ms. Fiorini, I would also be looking for some information, feedback, knowledge can be gleaned from other suburbs. Not Minneapolis. Minneapolis is great, but they're a completely different entity and work really differently from us and have a very different budget and there are all kinds of things that are different. But maybe Brooklyn Center, the Rosemount, so what kind of things, and maybe that's something that Ms. Fiorini would be bringing, but that would be information that would be important for me to understand.
Yeah, we do actually represent both of those cities.
Well, there you are. But I am certainly apprehensive about those long-term responsibilities. If you were saying, oh well, we own the building, we can find a different public purpose. Sure, maybe, but to a specific type of program becomes a very, very difficult thing to sign on to.
Yeah, I think that was one of my questions, was if for some reason Kids in Need wasn't able to continue the program, how easy is it to find somebody else to do that? Right. Because I don't know, I can't think of other entities. So that would be something that would be concerning for us too, both Councilmember Graff and Schroeder. So Councilmember Graff.
Yes, I agree with everything you said. Number one, of course, we want you to stay in Roseville, and of course, we want you to continue the work you're doing. I mean, it's no one is doubting that. I don't think. Mm-hmm. The issue for me is, what is the risk involved to the taxpayers? So I think some of the suggestions you had are exactly on point. If we could get more information on that, what would happen if X happened in 10 years? Mm-hmm. What would the city be able to do? What would happen in 20 years? I know we can't always predict the future, and even if we did have the building, I mean, other nonprofits have buildings, and it's not the easiest thing to do because you aren't set up with a maintenance system for a building, and stuff, things like that. So obviously we can do a little better because we do have a department, but I think my responsibility as a council person is to be sure this is the best thing for Roseville and for the taxpayers in Roseville. So I need more information.
Right. Councilmember Short.
And just to take that thought a little further is also we don't have a process to determine who we should do this for. So there's a lot of other nonprofits that if they knew Roseville was willing to do something like this, how do you choose which is, because we have a lot of great nonprofits. And so that's the other piece I'm wondering about, because we don't have that process to determine. And I know this is one that comes forward because there's a need, but if other people knew that this was an option, should we consider other nonprofits if we're going to do it? So that's just another question I have.
Sounds like we want to get that more information as much as we can get ahead of the sixth meeting. Probably would be good, so we can start to digest it and understand it, and maybe ask follow-up questions. But it sounds like we're going to have a discussion on the sixth. Certainly, I can't even remember what the agenda looks like, but I know we've got that coming up on our agenda this evening to talk about. And I did want to provide an opportunity for any follow-up on your part this evening as well, in case there's just some obvious thing that we should know about that you can help us with this
I
evening.
think getting the input of cities who have done this, as we started off, we understand this is new to the city, so appreciate having the opportunity to have the conversation. I'm not at all surprised that there would be questions or concerns. It's the first time, right? So, and it's not $100,000, it's $5 million, right? So it is not a significant. Brooklyn Park's first dance was 18 million, so at least they've set the bar even higher. But getting the cities, the St. Paul just did 2 and for 2024, 2 more. So obviously cities are doing this. So I think getting that input is great. You're not stuck. So these experts can also tell you about what are the options the city has. You're not stuck for 40 years. So that's not your risk. Okay, so there are options to get out that can be explored. The other comment I was going to make, in terms of, you have other nonprofits. Well, there's one practical avenue. You don't have to try to solve for which nonprofits we do this with or not. There's one practical aspect. If the state doesn't approve a GO bond, it's kind of a moot point, right? And so in some ways, in terms of, you don't have to necessarily decide who we're going to do this with or not. It's the state's going to if they're going to pass a law to say, yes, we are approving this, then that becomes a consideration for the city at that time, right? So practically speaking, the state legislator will tee up, if you will, candidates that may or may not be ones you want to consider, right? And then if you decide to pass, then of course, then the county becomes next in line, so to speak, right? So I think from that perspective, there is just a practical answer to that question: is who do we consider as well? If the state doesn't approve a GO bond through the legislative process anyway, then it becomes a moot point.
I'll also add too, as more of a capital creature, that while I do really hear and appreciate and respect this council's concerns about the risk of taking this sort of project on, I just want to also encourage you to think about the fact that statute is not immutable. It can be changed. And I know one example this session of a city who is currently clawing back a project where the nonprofit is no longer able to perform the function of a bond appropriated 5 years ago. So just kind of a thought as you gather more information in the weeks ahead, to think about that, talking to your representatives at the Capitol, like as a city council, sharing your inability to continue the original, intent of the bond, that is an option that is available. So just wanted to throw that option out there too for those concerns.
Mr. Trudgeon.
If I could, Mayor and Council, we're talking about kind of trying to get the information. Could you talk a little bit about the status of the bill? Committee deadlines have been passed or blown by, and what is the likelihood that this will be in the final legislation? We could do all this work in the upfront and it might not come to anything. I am concerned about this. The committee deadlines have passed, and I know anything can happen now with the legislature, but there are processes in place, and I'm just wondering how realistic it is to have something like this actually included in the final bill and signed by the governor.
Yes, I'm happy to provide that kind of perspective. So first thing that I'll say is bonding is not subject to committee deadlines. There's all these exceptions to the legislature, these legislative processes. Bonding is a unique situation in that in order for the bill to pass, you need 2/3 majority vote, as some of you probably know. And so you need the help and assistance of the minority party to pass a bonding bill. And so I say all that because and now I am hearing that conversations between majority and minority parties in both the House and Senate are going well. But oftentimes the bonding bill is one of the last things that is done in a legislative session because it is one of the only bargaining chips of the minority party in a legislative session. So it's not subject to deadlines, so no need to worry about that. And second of all, it could very well come together in the final hours of May 18th or May 19th through a agreement from both chambers. So there's still time for the city to collect the information as you've suggested this evening.
In other words, what she's saying is Kids in Need Foundation is nothing more than a bargaining chip at the state.
Well, we
Practically
feel your pain because we have a bonding request as well.
Yes.
Yes.
And so, I mean, it has dropped in both the House and the Senate.
Mhm.
We have some staunch supporters in both chambers, which we're pleased for. And we have had, gosh, I don't know how many tours now at our center here in Roseville. We've had just a steady drumbeat of legislators coming through and doing a tour, talking to the teachers, et cetera. They obviously are all eager to avoid a feeding the future type debacle. And so we've had, I don't know how many tours we've done. I've lost count at this stage. So we feel good, Pat. But really, up until the 11th hour of the day, really, who knows, right? It might be depending on what type of session. No, there is, rising tide lifts all boats, right? Where people are feeling good right now. And so there's some more collegiality, let's just say, that maybe has been lost in recent years that looks promising, but it's those 11th hour negotiations where we just become a bargaining chip, unfortunately. So that's where we are.
Great. I think we've got this pretty well set where we'll bring this back on the 6th then and try to get as much information as we can between now and then have some further discussion then. I do just want to be clear about a couple points and then we can move on is so this is the state issuing bonds and they issue a big bond issue for everything that's included in the bill basically. So they're not issuing individual bonds project by project. And so because the state has huge borrowing capability. So from a financial and a bonding point of view, I don't think we have too much to worry about the bonding process necessarily, as opposed to the city issuing bonds for a specific project and the financial aspects of that. So just to help people understand that part of it. But I think it is exactly whether any particular project ends up in the state's legislation. So that's the thing. Or whether there is a bonding bill at all at the end of the session, depending on how things go in their negotiations. So, all right. Well, thank you again for being here and helping us to gain a better understanding. And hopefully we'll move fast enough in increasing our understanding to be helpful to the process. Thank you. Good evening. All right, that brings us to our final business item this evening, item 7E, which is to talk about community aspirations adoption, as well as authorizing next steps towards doing a strategic planning process and receiving proposals. And so I'll turn it over again to Mr. Trudgeon to introduce this item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. I'll be really brief here. There's really two items as you mentioned. One is we want to just quickly revisit the community aspirations that were put forth as part of the Envision Roseville. The council did receive that information report, I think it was November, and we probably should formally adopt these as aspirations. We can start using them. That's just a small thing we haven't actually done. So I have included them in the packet. Certainly can talk about the wording if you like, but if not, we'd like to have the council adopt that and we can start updating things. The second part is to talk about the strategic plan that we always envisioned to come off of Envision Roseville. We used the word twice there. To really build off of those aspirations and really put in action our priorities and the work that we're going to be focusing on as an organization, as a city council, as staff, and to hit those aspirations and make sure we're focused on the right thing. So, as you know, typically we would throw out an RFP, we would run it by you, here's things, and then we go through an interview process. I think with this and talking to staff and the leadership team in particular, there's a feeling that this is so unique and context matters and what we're looking for, that we take a slightly different approach, that we still bring in consultants in to have an individual meeting with them to talk, provide them background, have a conversation, versus having a document speak, an RFP speak to what we want, to have a little bit more of a conversation that can hopefully, we would hope, have a response, a proposal that's more in line with what we're thinking and more responsive to what we're looking at. I know when we've done these arm length RFPs, we certainly get a fair share of responses, but as you look at them, they're often cookie cutter. They're not really localized to what we want, and I think oftentimes we've seen the result of that. So we want to be a little bit more deliberate. Can't guarantee that's going to happen. It's going to be ultimately who we choose and making sure it's the right process. But if we do that work in the front end a little bit, we can hopefully get better responses. We would still expect to receive a bunch of proposals from that, and we would still vet them, and we would still want to have a council interview the finalist. As part of that initial meeting, I think it's really key to have at least one council member part of that, work with staff, because this is your document really at the end of the day. And we need to make sure that you as a council are represented, at least at the beginning stage, to explain what expectations are, provide the context, the history, whatever we need to do on that. So what I'm asking for the next steps versus just issuing an RFP, and we've been working in the background on a draft RFP, but it's one of those technical documents that doesn't give you a lot of inspiration to come back with something unique. So what we're hoping to do is set this process in motion where we can start even this week reaching out to consultants, bring them in, schedule some meetings, and then from that then have shoot for realistically probably June before we can start interviewing the finalists, but try to move as fast as we can on that to get that process started. The other thing we should talk about, we don't have to complete the conversation tonight, and start thinking about the actual strategic planning effort that we would do. We did one in 2014, 2015. I think only 2 of you were there. We did 2 half days here in the council chambers with a facilitator, department heads, and council. So we should talk about time of day. Should we do it 1 day, 2 days? Should it be on the weekend? Should it be during the weekday? What days? Should it be in the evening instead of the day? And then other miscellaneous things. Do we want it recorded? We did record it in 2015, I think it was. You want minutes of the actual conversation, how deep you want to get into that. So, and I teed that up in the council case. So I will be quiet here to get over some response from where we want to go with that, but also just remind you that we do want to approve the community aspirations here tonight.
And to that point, maybe we should tackle that request first and see if we can get to maybe potentially approval of the aspirations. If it looks like we're going to have to do a ton of rewriting, I'm not sure we're there that we want to do that. But are we at a point where we might be able to just take the output of last 2 years process and adopt those as our aspirations going forward? Thoughts from the council? Councilmember Strong.
Are we following what's in the 7E item, or because it differs significantly from this Envision Roseville packet?
Yeah, so we did. I'm not sure significant.
So the Envision Roseville packet, I actually requested that was the presentation last fall as the output of the process. And the reason I wanted that included as information for this discussion was that it actually has the aspirations and a lot of the additional information, just to help our thought process and inform our conversation.
I wasn't sure because there's also a section title with the same title that loosely interprets many of the items, but not all. Sure.
So yeah, I should have clarified that is strictly just a bench handout of exactly the report we got last fall as a reference material for this evening.
But the aspirations, as we're talking about in the report, we tried to capture this as much as possible. We did have our communication staff kind of work on that, and actually this wording is really based on what the mayor talked about in the business council. And we just tried to not change anything, but just try to make it read better and better clarity, and maybe the mayor can speak to that as well.
No, that's a very good point. So most of these follow pretty clearly with what was in the Envision Roseville report. I think there were a couple of them that were a little bit reworded by the communications folks and community engagement folks, and then I did some further tweaking with them before my presentation to the business council. The primary changes, I think, related to the housing related one, which is thriving diverse neighborhoods. Talking about, it was just the order of the wording was kind of clunky and it didn't quite read as easily and clearly, so we did some changes there. And then the one related to the business community, you might have to scroll up a little bit. Let's see. The
It's economically prosperous.
yeah, I'm trying to think. Oh, it was primarily the one about the thriving diverse neighborhoods. I think that was the one that had the biggest amount of changes to it. Obviously, you could look at the report and see where more specific differences are. But in my reading of what came out of the process of sort of the re-editing by the community engagement folks, the rest of it was pretty good. I just needed a little bit of further tweaking to clean up, and smooth out the language on the thriving diverse neighborhoods.
I would just recommend that the economically prosperous start with the same convention that the rest of them do. So a community or a city that is just because it's the one off out of that bunch that doesn't quite match.
Yeah. And I think if you scroll up to the lead-in sentence, it says we aspire to be, then it kind of makes sense that we start out by saying economically prosperous. But I think you're right.
Or you could say Roseville as a city aspires to be, and then take that beginning part out of each one of those, and then each bullet point is an action item.
Sure.
So that's the not.
I think it doesn't work completely for all of them, including the thriving and diverse neighborhoods one. So it might be easier just to insert a community that is on the economically prosperous.
I did notice the same thing when I was reading through them. I thought, now why is it? And then I went up to the top and I thought, well, it does make sense, but it is
it's coming back to me as that was something I thought about at that time too. Yeah. Other thoughts or concerns, questions, Councilor Schroeder?
Actually, I just need a clarification or definition. On the last one, a community with a safe, inclusive, and well-connected transportation and infrastructure systems. Is the word inclusive talking about the transportation modes, or is inclusive talking about people?
Both. I think it was an all-purpose inclusive in my interpretation, in that we're looking at all different types of transportation infrastructure, and we're making sure that it serves all different types of people. I think it's a multi-purpose inclusive there.
Well, because it talks about some of that, the people down below, and so that's why I was wondering. So you're really then including people twice, right?
Yep, because people are that important to us.
I would just assert that in that particular line, with a safe, inclusive, and well-connected transportation and infrastructure system that supports. So move the S from system to
system. Yeah.
Supports.
Could you repeat that again?
Infrastructure system
Instead of an S on
that supports.
Yep. I'm surprised the mayor of Grammar didn't find that one.
I am too. Disappointed.
It's embarrassing.
I may have to give up my title. Other thoughts? Otherwise, maybe a motion to adopt the aspirations with those changes?
I move to adopt the aspirations with those
Second.
changes.
All right. It's moved by Councilmember McGrath, second by Councilmember Strawn to approve the aspirations with the changes as noted this evening. Any discussion on the motion maker of the motion, Councilmember McGrath?
I just rereading them and revisiting this was really good. I felt really good about what was in this, our aspirations, and I look forward to working on it more.
Right. Is the seconder Councilmember Strawn?
I mean, it's kind of a little bit of a few. It's just nice to know that all of that process, seen from the beginning to the end, is kind of concrete. And now I think back to when a city manager Trudgeon said we're kind of out of what to do next, and then hopefully now our next process is to give you guys as a city staff and us as a council what those next steps are, rooted in this wealth of knowledge.
Right. Any other discussion on the motion? Councilmember Adden.
I didn't wordsmith this a lot. I think there are a lot of words in here. That could go a lot of directions. I think that to Councilmember Schroeder's point around what it inclusive for. So I guess there'll be a lot of directions we can take this, and it's fine. I don't disagree with any of these pieces, but there's just a lot of words that can mean a lot of things.
Councilmember Schroeder.
Yeah, and I was going to say the same thing as Councilmember Etten is. I support the general concept of all of these. I think some of the wordsmithing there might be, we might want to look at it, but the concepts and how it is, I think I'm supportive of that. So.
And I would say that it's a living document,
Right,
so
right.
we can
That's
always
what I'm saying.
revisit the wording if we find it not working as we go through the strategic planning process or other aspects of what we do. I'll be supportive as well from that perspective. So we have the motion to adopt those aspirations as discussed this evening with changes. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. And then as to the strategic planning process, I did want to say a couple of things just to kind of kick off the conversation. One of the reasons I asked that the report from Envision was included was because not only does the report include the aspiration, but it has the where ... in several bullet points. And I think that is the starting point of some measurable objectives and some things that we can work towards. And so that's why I want to make sure that we don't lose track of that, because otherwise we could be spinning our wheels, not having that raw material to start from. And even beyond that, in some of the aspirations, it even talks about more specific measures of some of those things or concerns expressed by the community. And so I thought that was really helpful. I was going through that this afternoon, and that process helped inform what our strategic planning might look like from a couple of perspectives. And one is the notion of sort of identifying what those outcomes are under each of the aspirations is important because we want to know what we're looking for, what we're trying to achieve. I think a big piece of this is also to understand and acknowledge what we're already doing towards some of those things, so that we don't sort of think of this as, oh, we've got to institute 1,000 new programs to accomplish these things, but rather, hey, let's do ourselves a favor by giving ourselves the pat on the back and the credit for the things that we're already doing towards these things and doing well, maybe. And then we can narrow our focus as a strategic plan as to, okay, where are we falling short? Where have we not done as much success? And then we can come up with strategies then to push us towards better accomplishment there. So that's sort of how, at a 30,000 foot level, I would envision the strategic planning process. As to whether we meet twice and we meet in mornings or afternoons or weekdays or weekends, I think that may be a little further down, but it's good to know that that's a part of what the decision making that we have to do is. But I think we all need to be on the same page as to what this process is going to be, and so hopefully that I've just outlined kind of gives an agreeable overall perspective to it, and then we can start to talk about more, filling out the bones of that. I don't know. Any bone filling out or any disagreement of that council members have this evening at this unfortunately late hour? Councilmember Schroeder?
Yeah, no, I think you make a good point because you need something to start with, on this. And it's really important that who's ever working on this all have the same priorities of what we're trying to, in the corporate world, I guess you call it, the objectives. What are we trying to get done? What are we, and so to have something like that is important. But I also, I wanted to talk about the consulting piece of that too. You want to make sure we get the right consultant to walk us through this, to make sure they keep us on task and that they know what they're doing when it comes to strategic plan, because I know Pat said we did it before, but technically I think that last one wasn't really a strategic plan. It was more kind of like a work plan. Anyway, I just want to make sure we get the right consultant to help us walk through this.
Absolutely. Councilmember Etten.
I was going to say, I appreciate the framing you've given. I think one of the key things here is what are we already doing? Because most of these aspirations aren't vastly different from what we had before. There's some little adjustments. There's an addition of a little bit, right? But we're not talking about brand new big ideas. So to ensure at some point we're saying, well, what are we doing towards these aspirations? What do we want to expand in this area, or what's a new program? That's fine. But if we don't talk about what we're doing right now, we're probably going to create a whole bunch of soup, and the staff will look at us funny and cross eyes and walk out the door. So
Well, and to be clear, I think that would be an exercise that we and whoever else is involved in those weekday, weekend, evening, afternoon sessions would go through an exercise, guided by the consultant to, go through each aspiration, talk about the outcomes, make sure we all tend to have an agreement on what the outcomes we're trying to achieve are, and then do some of that inventory of what we're already doing and where we should be focusing, and then we can zero in on some, specific strategic objectives. Because ultimately, this has to be manageable for us going forward. All you have to do is go back to the document that came out of Imagine Roseville 2020 back in 2005, right? And it was 70 pages of probably good ideas, but it was all over the place. And it was clearly something we couldn't achieve as an organization without a winnowing process. And, so we started from the fire hose and attempted to winnow it down. It seems like a better process is to start, to get focused first and then pick those things that we can really focus on as an organization to get us, close gaps, those types of things. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
no, you're fine. I don't disagree with any of that. So thank you. I'm wondering about, is the best value procurement method a process that might work, or some adaptation on that, where we do have some form of an RFP, but we're asking people to come in and say, hey, here's how we could do this differently. Let's listen to them. Let's have them listen to us. How do they make a proposal that really fits and niches into Roseville? Certainly, we've seen lots of consultants come in where it's such a cut and paste. They left the other city's name in the thing, right? So can we get them in the door, several different organizations, and have them talk about how they could make some of these things really happen, what their strengths are that would work for Roseville and what we need before we are saying yes.
Well, we could certainly look to try to do a lot of the values from the best value. I'm not trained in it. I know some of our parks folks are. I'm familiar with it, but we can certainly talk about that and kind of how we bring some of those ideas into the process. I think meeting in person and having a conversation and asking not just the standard questions, identifying the risk, what's the value add that you bring, can all be important data. I do think along the way, while there may be some vetting to say, well, we got 7 and we're going to talk to 3 of them. That's when you can get really into the deepest of what they're proposing. So let me bring that back to the team and see how we can maybe manage that. As I said, I'm not trained to do that, but I know our organization is not that.
Well, and right to you in a minute. I was just going to say, I think the best overall value is our version of that for professional services. And it was pretty nebulous. But I think what staff is kind of describing as the notion of bringing in potential bidders and talking through and saying, here's the basics of what we're looking at, and having that conversation is sort of a part of that. So it's not out of line with what you're talking about or what the staff was suggesting. We just kind of put a name to it. Councilmember Strong.
Being new to this process, I'm not quite sure I know the order of operations, but where do staff fall in all of this decision? And, are you the staff that speaks for the whole organization? I mean, because there are possibilities that we may omit something that's really important that's been in place, or a really great idea. Chief Brosnahan has a list a mile long of things he wants to do, and he knows his area so well. That's not maybe something that we would have on our radar. So I want to make sure we respect the expertise of the people that we entrust to do the work every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the intent would be to have all the department heads here sitting side by side with the council. We're all having the same conversation and working through the real important work afterwards to help operationalize the conversation, and finalize will be through staff and then brought back to you folks. But for that day or 2 days, it'd be department heads and city council sitting around the table having the same conversation.
Let's invite Rachel.
Well, Rachel might not be there.
Oh.
And actually, that's why you have to have a really good consultant, because you're going to have so many people involved. You want to make sure that they can keep us focused going. And for my 2 cents, I would go for 2 half days, because it's good to do some work, have some time to think about it and come back versus trying to sludge through 8 or 10 hours in one day. This is my thought on that.
I mean, look at us in this. We've only been at this for 3 hours and a quarter, and we're already
And
too
getting
much.
started.
And to require the staff to do, a full day on top of their regular day, yes, I think you need to break it up a little bit. This is my thought.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, obviously, once we have a consultant on board, whoever that might be, that's going to inform the schedule, timing when they can do it, when they're available. So you certainly don't want to lock in days or anything like that. I just wanted to start having a conversation. So as we progress, we can keep talking about that. And once we have the consultant, we can talk specifics about how that works.
And we maybe could say one weekend day, but the fact is we have a whole group of people who work Monday through Friday. We're the few compared to them. So, I mean, I think anything that we can do to be aware of that as soon as possible and that there's some flexibility for what we do during the day is helpful.
And I think one of the things that you were sort of looking for was potentially having a council member as part of that sort of that pre-process.
Yes.
Thoughts as to council members who might be interested in that, working with staff on that. I have an interest in the subject matter, but I don't want
I
to
would
jump
be
in.
interested in
Okay.
that because and actually, I do strategic planning with my clients now. So, I not that I would absolutely wouldn't say what to do, but I think I have a pretty good understanding of how at least the corporate world and how they do it. So,
Right.
this is my thought.
And I just suggested one.
We could have two.
I would say it doesn't hurt to have two.
I was actually going to suggest that maybe two would be better.
Well, if it makes sense, I mean,
And
have a
I'd love
fairly
to do it. I just don't have the bandwidth.
Right. I certainly have the understanding of sort of, what the envision is and the aspirations and how that all fits together. So if that is a good combination, I'd be happy to do that.
I have the mechanics and you have the
And
detail.
whatever else is.
Yeah.
And
Dr.
you've been
Grammer-
through it
I mean, Mayor
somewhat
Grammer.
before, so I think it makes sense to have the newest person counsel and the one with the longest.
And the oldest guy?
The oldest.
I didn't say longest. I said longest.
See, this comes to bite you back.
No, that's the institutional memory.
Yeah.
All right. Is that everything staff was looking for?
I think that's all.
Okay. And I would be happy to sort of help with. I had thought of some suggested language, on the draft little, blurb that's in the packet.
Sure.
I'd be happy to help out with that offline too. We don't need to wordsmith at our council meeting at 9:15. All right. I believe that concludes our business items this evening. Next on the agenda is the consent items, and I'll turn it over once again to Mr. Trudgeon to introduce the consent items for this evening.
Okay, item 10, and I still say 12, that was from the last meeting, sorry, it was 10. 10A approves payments in the amount of $1,653,451.77. Item 10B approves two temporary liquor licenses, one for the Rotary Club of Roseville for the Taste of Rose Fest event on June 27th, the other for Bent Distillery for an event on May 25th. This action also approves a temporary gambling license for an event hosted by the Parkview Center School PTSA on May 17th. Item 10C approves an ordinance transferring the procedures for the preparation, adoption, and amendment of the comprehensive plan from Chapter 2, which regulates commissions, to Chapter 10, the zoning code. This action also approves publication of an ordinance summary. Item 10D approves appointments to the variance board. Planning Commissioners Asmus, Schaffhausen, and Bjorn will serve on the board, with Commissioner McGeehee serving as an alternate. Item 10E approves entering into a grant agreement with the state of Minnesota for the Pathways to Policing grant that will provide the city of Roseville with $30,000 to help the city assist our police cadets and CSOs to cover their costs for education to become a certified and licensed police officer. There is no match requirement for this grant. And finally, item 10F approves entering into a grant agreement with the state of Minnesota for the Intensive Comprehensive Peace Officer Education and Training Grant in the amount of $100,000 to assist the city in recruiting individuals to become a police officer that have a 2 or 4 year degree that are looking to pursue a career transition into law enforcement. This grant also does not have a matching grant.
All right, thank you, Mr. Trudgeon. Is there a motion on the consent items?
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Groff, seconded by Councilmember Schroeder. Any discussion on the motion? I would just note a couple of things. One is that last grant program, the acronym is the IC Poet program. If you want to shorten up your presentation next time.
I wasn't told to explain it. I use acronyms. So I said
Yes,
the
yes.
full
No,
word.
I understand completely.
I see.
And then just to clarify on the Bedford Distillery license, that is a special event, one of their 12 permitted special event licenses, I believe. We had a member of the public question it as a club license, but no, I don't think it is a club license.
No,
It's a special event.
Yes, it's a temporary liquor license.
Yeah. Okay.
I think they were listed as a club under their
Oh,
items
they checked the box.
when they checked the box as a
okay.
club.
It's on the form itself. Okay. Got it. Thank you. With that, we've got the motion before us. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That passes unanimously. Those items are approved. Mr. Treasurer, once again, you're on to review the upcoming agendas
Just real quick.
with some changes.
Yep, so May 6th, we talked about that. We'll certainly add Kids in Need Foundation back on there. Talk about the financial audit, have the audit presented to you actually, and we'll get that in your packet beforehand so you have the full audit. We talk about the budget process calendar, just about some of the information packages we'll do, just kind of revisit that conversation. We look to have the contract approval for Roseville police officers, 2 police officers that they would pay for. We have 5 liquor license violations you can see. I offhand I don't recall, but I think there's a couple that are repeat violators, so it's different penalties. And as I mentioned, Kids in Need. On the 13th, we do have an EDA meeting. We just want to have a conversation about updating our housing study and look at some different things that was put into the budget. We talked about it before, but I'd like to maybe get that started, and then we'll spend the rest of the night talking with the HRIC scope, purpose, and their role. So we'll have an opportunity to hopefully make some good progress on that, so we know what our next steps are. And then 20th, we have the health department equity update and the fire department staffing review.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Trudgeon. Are there questions on the upcoming agenda, Councilmember Strong?
Just to confirm, and for public record, the HRAC was unable to meet last time because of a lack of a quorum,
Lack of a
correct?
quorum, correct.
Okay.
Councilmember initiated items for future agendas or reports, announcements from council members?
Board of Metro Cities, Wednesday night here at the Oval.
Leadership luncheon for NYFS.
NYFS on May 8th at 11:30 at Bandus Heights Commons.
All right, other announcements? I did want to report one small thing, hopefully it'll be quick, from my work on the Land Use Advisory Committee at the Met Council. A lot of talk about the system plans that are being developed that get sent out to the cities to work on their next comprehensive plan update. Believe it or not, it seems like we just finished ours. It's every 10 years. One of the discussions at our last meeting was about transit and transit-oriented development, and I advocated for the notion of not just focusing on a lot of housing density around transit, but also job density, because you need that nexus, because I think that's one of the challenges we see with folks is their inability to get to employment using transit very effectively. I think we've heard that from people in the Kren community and the Bhutanese and Nepalese community in southeast Roseville and others. And so I just wanted to note that on our behalf, I had put in that 2 cents, and I'm one of only about 5 regular attendees out of the 12 or 15 that are supposed to be there. So I think I have a lot of power. So let me know anything else you want me to advocate for.
I would love to make sure that the food desert situation is discussed as well around transit, just because a lot of folks who lack solid transportation are really living in a food desert in certain areas, especially North Minneapolis is wrecked. So just as it's looking at a metro-wide situation.
Yep. No, that actually has been on the radar screen of that process. So
Good.
appreciate you bringing that up. All right. If there's no other business before the council, the only other item on our agenda this evening is adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
All right. It's been moved by Councilmember Strong and second by Councilmember Etten to adjourn. No discussion on the motion to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. Before I bang the gavel,
First.
officially adjourning the meeting, I did want to recognize we had a couple of students from Century College, I believe, with us this evening, and they stuck it out to the bitter end.
That's one of our longest meetings in months.
I was going to say last
And
week
at
was like
least
10
one
minutes.
is a Roseville resident and looking to get involved.
So thank you for being here, and hopefully we didn't bore you to tears too much, but appreciate your
Have
interest.
Rachel call them.
Now we are adjourned at 9:23 p.m. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, board.